Hello guys, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Tsunade rejected every student except Naruto Part 1? The letter crumbles under Tsunade's fingers as she growls, the elaborate fabric tearing under her ruby red nails. Shizune must not have registered the key flowing fiercely out of her Shisho's figure as she pipes up. What does it say, Tsunade-sama? What does it say? The woman barks, viciously scrunching the scroll into a makeshift ball before hurling it with all her strength. What does it say? The scroll promptly catches on fire, the dry fabric not bearing the sudden pressure and friction. Tsunade grinds her molars as Shizune jumps back in shock. We're going back to Konoha. She bites out with so much vitriol that Shizune daren't ask for the reason. Recalling the contents of the letter, Tsunade aggressively makes her way back to their temporary lodging, the ground fissuring under the raw power of her aggravation. You are a vital part of our forces. That. It would be extremely beneficial to Konoha if you returned. That. It is a shame that our Iryo ninjutsu has deteriorated as so. That can also be Ed. It would be horrible if one would die because of your lack of action. That also. I don't take you as one to turn the other cheek to people's sufferings. That too. As she exits the building of her recent stay, she slammed the door so violently that her surroundings shook, dust clouding off the walls. As the granddaughter of the Shadaime, lover of a renowned Jonin and brother of a loyal shinobi, I'd expect to see you soon. It burdens me greatly to have to go to this length, but unfortunately, Tsunade, I will proclaim you nuke nin if you do not return immediately. That. A week later. Disappointing. Tsunade slams the papers down onto Sarutobi's desk. I literally didn't even need to start picking them out. They're all completely hopeless. You call these potential candidates? You think I would stoop to that level of inanity? You think I, a Sanin that had survived generations of warfare, would deign to take on any of those idiots as an apprentice? Now Tsunade, the Hokage rubs his temple as if she was the one being irrational. Well, good, she guesses. He deserved that headache. They're only children. Talk to them directly in class, it will serve both as an inspiration and a drive. Perhaps you will see their potential then. There was a moment of bewildered silence. Children, she spits, not caring for etiquette. Sarutobi had dared to use Dan and Nawaki to bait her back, dared to guilt-trip her into coming back to this blasted place, and now they're forcing her to take on a student, forcing her to mentor one of those, who was it? The civilian fangirl, the shy Hyuga heiress, or the Yamanaka heiress fangirl? She could very much see herself accidentally crippling one of them out of irritation. Children, you say? Tsunade laughs derisively. If they're old enough to be responsible for people's lives, then I'm pretty sure they're old enough to stop acting like brainless brats and nauseatingly stalkerish fangirls. The harshness of the academy had lowered to discouraging levels. Simple skills like tree walking techniques weren't even taught. That school might as well be a civilian one, or worse in how it feeds their ego. Then on the flip side, child soldiers were a thing and still are a thing. Danzo runs amok with Root, using methods that she very much does not want to know about to torture children. To desensitize them. To dehumanize them. And what? Does the Hokage give a shit? Sarutobi could try and deny Danzo's many nefarious deeds, but in the end he was selling himself out as either a fool or a mealy mouth. And neither were traits that any leader worth respect should have. Tsunade had been here for a mere week and she could see the dark edge to this village. She wonders whether or not Danzo would still be alive if he hadn't been Sarutobi's childhood friend. Favoritism. It was a stain on the robes of the Hokage. Danzo might as well have instigated the Uchiha massacre from behind the scenes, leaving with no more than a slap on the wrist. On that note, she could actually imagine that happening. Tsunade. Sarutobi sighs, sounding old and tired. Well, if he was too old and tired to act like an actually shinobi, let alone a Hokage, then he should resign. Just do as you're told. She scoffs. Disappointing. She snarls once again, storming out of the office and paying no heed to how the door shattered into pieces on impact when she slammed it behind her. Tsunade receives a letter. Chapter text. ... Sincerely. Sandame Hokage. Sarutobi Hiruzen. The letter crumbles under Tsunade's fingers as she growls, the elaborate fabric tearing under her ruby-red nails. Shizune must not have registered the key flowing fiercely out of her Shisho's figure as she pipes up, "What does it say, Tsunade-sama? What does it say?" The woman barks, viciously scrunching the scroll into a makeshift ball before hurling it with all her strength. What does it say? The scroll promptly catches on fire, the dry fabric not bearing the sudden pressure and friction. Tsunade grinds her molars as Shizune jumps back in shock. Quote exclamation mark. We're going back to Konoha. She bites out with so much vitriol that Shizune daren't ask for the reason. Recalling the contents of the letter, Tsunade aggressively makes her way back to their temporary lodging, the ground fissuring under the raw power of her aggravation. You are a vital part of our forces. That. It would be extremely beneficial to Konoha if you returned. That. It is a shame that our Iryo ninjutsu has deteriorated as so. That can also be Ed. It would be horrible if one would die because of your lack of action. That also. I don't take you as one to turn the other cheek to people's sufferings. That too. As she exits the building of her recent stay, she slammed the door so violently that her surroundings shook, dust clouding off the walls. As the granddaughter of the Shadaime, lover of a renowned Jonin and brother of a loyal shinobi, I'd expect to see you soon. It burdens me greatly to have to go to this length, but unfortunately, Tsunade, I will proclaim you Nuke Nin if you do not return immediately. That. A week later. Disappointing. Tsunade slams the papers down onto Sarutobi's desk. I literally didn't even need to start picking them out. They're all completely hopeless. You call these potential candidates? You think I would stoop to that level of inanity? You think I, a Sanin that had survived generations of warfare, would deign to take on any of those idiots as an apprentice? Now Tsunade, the Hokage rubs his temple as if she was the one being irrational. Well, good, she guesses. He deserved that headache. They're only children. Talk to them directly in class, it will serve both as an inspiration and a drive. Perhaps you will see their potential then. There was a moment of bewildered silence. Quote. Children, she spits, not caring for etiquette. Sarutobi had dared to use Dan and Nawaki to bait her back, dared to guilt-trip her into coming back to this blasted place, and now they're forcing her to take on a student, forcing her to mentor one of those, who was it? The civilian fangirl, the shy Hyuga heiress, or the Yamanaka heiress fangirl? She could very much see herself accidentally crippling one of them out of irritation. Children, you say? Tsunade laughs derisively. If they're old enough to be responsible for people's lives, then I'm pretty sure they're old enough to stop acting like brainless brats and nauseatingly stalkerish fangirls. The harshness of the academy had lowered to discouraging levels, simple skills like tree walking techniques weren't even taught. That school might as well be a civilian one, or worse in how it feeds their ego. Then on the flip side, child soldiers were a thing and still are a thing. Danzo runs amok with Root, using methods that she very much does not want to know about to torture children. To desensitize them. To dehumanize them. And what? Does the Hokage give a shit? Sarutobi could try and deny Danzo's many nefarious deeds, but in the end he was selling himself out as either a fool or a mealy mouth. And neither were traits that any leader worth respect should have. Tsunade had been here for a mere week and she could see the dark edge to this village. She wonders whether or not Danzo would still be alive if he hadn't been Sarutobi's childhood friend. Favoritism. It was a stain on the robes of the Hokage. Danzo might as well have instigated the Uchiha massacre from behind the scenes, leaving with no more than a slap on the wrist. On that note, she could actually imagine that happening. Tsunade. Sarutobi sighs, sounding old and tired. Well, if he was too old and tired to act like an actually shinobi, let alone a Hokage, then he should resign. Just do as you're told. She scoffs. Disappointing. She snarls once again, storming out of the office and paying no to how the door shattered into pieces on impact when she slammed it behind her. Tsunade. Sarutobi sighs, sounding old and tired. Well, if he was too old and tired to act like an actually shinobi, let alone a Hokage, then he should resign. Just do as you're told. She scoffs. Disappointing. She snarls once again, storming out of the office and paying no heed to how the door shattered into pieces on impact when she slammed it behind her. The next day, Tsunade cloaks her presence surreptitiously as she walks through the academy halls. She casually sends a whisper of chakra to her ears, honing her senses until she could hear. Suk-kun is mine. You won't be able to heal his heart like I do. Get away from him. Sasuke-kun is mine. And she already hated that class. The noise gets progressively louder as she nears the door. Sasuke-kun will be my husband one day. Like Sasuke-kun would want to have babies with you. What are you talking about? We would have beautiful Sharingan babies. Tsunade opens the sliding door, presence still cloaked, but if someone pays attention, they would notice. She stands by the lectern, eyeing and picking at the atrociously light beige-green painted wood. Tsunade tries to zone out on the fangirls, screeching, but she felt her control nearly waver in anger with every passing sentence. She waits and waits and waits. Of course, no one notices. Disappointing. She says again, uncloaking her chakra, and she can feel every student freeze at the sudden presence. Tsunade holds back a groan of despair because even though the extent she had hidden her presence was very advanced, as long as if someone actually used their eyes, they would notice. Some were even facing her, though staring off into space. A platinum blonde-haired girl opens her mouth in indignation. Who do you think you are? The Yamanaka, though she hates using the term with such an undistinguished brat, continues false saccharinely. If you're lost, I'll tell you where you are. This is the Academy for Shinobi. You know who they are, right? Tsunade finally relents to sighing, and if she did it extra loudly, then she wouldn't deny to it. The heiress of the Yamanaka clan. Tsunade looks up from where she was commiserating with the lectern, and she doesn't even relish in the stunned silence at the familiar appearance of her face. The famed Sanin's profiles were probably handed out like candies in academy. It was ludicrous how they could aspire to be like her while screaming over a traumatized boy. I say again. She bites out harshly. Disappointing. The girl flinches, and this time, no one shouts in defense of her. It might seem mean of Tsunade, but she was just dishing out the facts. If they couldn't take the truth, how could they be reliable shinobi? When are you graduating? There are half-hearted murmurs of, next week, next year, and, this week, and she felt her patience drawing a thin line. She exhales loudly, and for some reason, it came out like a growl. Do you know why I'm here? It wasn't a question. Certain that they couldn't answer that, Tsunade forged on. Can anyone guess why I'm here? To talk to us about the life of shinobi. The pink-haired one raises an arm hesitantly before clasping her hands in front of her chest, tilting her head in a purposeful way that was probably a pathetic attempt to look cute. Clasping your hands is the act of a suicidal idiot. Exposure to the carotid artery and the jugular vein, one kunai for others, one finger for me, easy kill. She intones in a dull voice, not even blinking as she jolts out of her posture. What? Don't tell me you didn't learn that the neck was vulnerable to fatal attacks in academy. You know, to become a shinobi, you first need to learn what could kill you. And I can name more than dozen things in the classroom that can. Tsunade hushes slowly in a superficially sweet tone before her voice lowered again, a strict meanness dosing her words like poison. Myself being the first on the list. You're off to get killed, honey. Well, if you aren't here to teach us about shinobi. Do you think I would come here to give you a lesson on shinobi? Tsunade felt offended. I would think the top, kunoichi, of the class would know better than that. You really think any shinobi above the caliber of AB rank would give kids a lecture? At the tense silence, Tsunade stared at each student, eyeing them like one would weigh a bag of flour, testing their strength, their potential, their guts. The only redeeming fact about the decision to meet the students in person was the notion that they'd probably be too scared or annoyed to want to be her student. Quote. You were observing us. Talking to the senseis. The Uchiha boy suggested quietly. Sanin would have no reason to do anything under an A or S rank mission, and visiting the academy would mean that you were looking for people with potential to take on as a student. By the shocked stares of some boys, he was no doubt acting out of character, perhaps he was less haughty than usual. No one would dare to be self-confident in front of a legend after all. Correct. She gifts him a small tilt of a lip. Not a smile, but for the first time, not a look of disdain. I'm glad that someone actually uses their brain here. I will not. Tsunade had slammed her hand onto the table. Preposterous. Homura had snapped. Who do you think you are? A legendary Sanin. She had countered just as meanly. You should be glad that I hadn't turned nuke. You couldn't handle Orochimaru. Who do you think you are? Tsunade had thrown back. Handling you would be easy, Homura had growled. As long as you have the Kato by your side. Homura. Sarutobi had cut in his killing intent flooded room, radiating with pure bloodthirst as Tsunade had glared at the man. You will not threaten Tsunade or Shizune. The audacity to speak as so to my student. Tsunade. Kaharu had cautiously approached. We will provide you with triple the income for each of you, your ward and your disciple. You will have enough Ryo to live luxuriously on the account that you do not gamble. Take on an apprentice, pass down the slug contract. Then I want no hand in helping the hospital. Apprentices in lieu of running a building. Quote. Fine. Don't make this more difficult for the both of us. I was recommended to take on one of 3 students in this class, though right now, I'm greatly regretting my decision. Tsunade's eyes dart from person to person, the Inoshika Cho trio, the Inazuka, Aburame, Hyuga, Uchiha, so many clan heirs and all of them utterly useless. Zero guts. Zero passion. There was no way for her to evaluate their true potential if they didn't have the determination, the battle, or the will of fire. After the Uchiha massacre, she didn't doubt that countless civilian parents withdrew their children, finally understanding what the life of a soldier was like. She had expected mature clan heirs and persevering shinobi to be civilians with bright goals, but instead she had thought that at least the Haruno girl was promising 0 capacity yet 100 control, disadvantageous circumstances yet the knowledge that placed her high, civil-born yet named top kunoichi, but it took a single glance at her in the class to dismiss that thought. Clearly the standards had gone down. Sarutobi. A few heads jerked at the informal title. She normally called him sensei, but as soon as she read the letter, that moniker had long since been trampled on, told me that you had potential. She sees the self-absorbed arrogance well up in quite a few people. He had probably said that to convince me to take on an apprentice. I can now see that it was a lie. The ballooned egos popped in their faces. Yamanaka. The blonde snaps to attention, Haruno, the pinket tilts her head again and blinks prettily, and Hyuga. The heiress yelps quietly before turning a bright shade of red. You 3 were supposedly good at chakra control. Promising candidates for apprentices. The 3 had different expressions on their faces. The Yumenka poorly hidden pride, the Haruno disgustingly fake bashfulness, and the Hyuga who was shaking her head aggressively and hunching her shoulders. Obviously, I am not taking any of you 3 as apprentices. She presses her lips together in a fake grim smile. The Yumenka heiress. fawning over an Uchiha, talking about how mysterious and cool he is because of his circumstances. Pray tell, are you even considering your own name? Tsunade leans in with a facsimile expression of curiosity before she swings to look at the pink-haired girl. And you, Haruno, highest grading kunoichi, how did you manage to do that? With that repulsive farce of a sweet girl you are trying to pull. I'm N. I could bet my wallet that you wanted to become best, solely so that you could have the Uchiha's attention. At the sudden violent flush on her face and the not at all subtle glances to the Uchiha, Tsunade sneers. Taking one look at the Hyuga girl who looked like she was about to curl into her intestines, she relented at giving her a jab. The heiress clearly had her psychological issues to deal with, as unfitting of a heir as it would be. Taking another sweep of the room, Shikaku's mini-me looking disturbingly attentive, Shu's sun-eating CS, she gave a mirthful, good-natured scoff at that, gaining many surprised looks. The Aburame looked unreadable as usual and the Inuzuka was scarily contemplative. The Uchiha looked somewhat approving, vindicated and satisfied. The reprimands of their current academy sensei had probably never driven home in the fangirls' minds. Poor boy, having to deal with half a class of squealing girls. Seeing the deer in the headlights look from the Hyuga, the mortified and ashamed look from the Yamanaka and the confused and frustrated look from the Haruno, Tsunade gave a sigh. She might have been too hard after all, she had to take an apprentice in the end. If the next class was just as bad. Tsunade opens her mouth to start talking again when the window slammed open and a bright orange blur darted behind Tsunade. Feeling no malicious intent, she let him, feeling slightly curious. Naruto, where are you hidin'? A brunette chunin started angrily, ripping open the door before noticing Tsunade's presence and the boy behind her. Ah, forgive me Tsunade Haim. My student is a little bit of a menace, please don't mind him and continue the lesson. He then stalks forward and angrily grabs the boy by his collar. You just don't appreciate my art TT Ibeo. Naruto, screeches in Uzumaki. Tsunade knows that chakra, knows that verbal tick. If you're so amazing, how come you're those tree ninjas never catch me, huh, huh. Uzumaki Naruto Kushina and Minato's son screams with the loudness and loneliness of a neglected child. If you want me to stop pranking, then ya have to chase me better. Believe it, Datbeo. Naruto, where are you hidin'? A brunette chunin started angrily, ripping open the door before noticing Tsunade's presence and the boy behind her. Ah, forgive me Tsunade Haim. My student is a little bit of a menace, please don't mind him and continue the lesson. He then stalks forward and angrily grabs the boy by his collar. You just don't appreciate my art TT Ibeo. Naruto, screeches in Uzumaki. Tsunade knows that chakra, knows that verbal tick. If you're so amazing, how come you're those tree ninjas never catch me, huh, huh. Uzumaki Naruto Kushina and Minato's son screams with the loudness and loneliness of a neglected child. If you want me to stop pranking, then ya have to chase me better. Believe it, Datbeo. Tree ninjas, Tsunade says curiously because he can't possibly. Yeah, they're kinda weird, Datbeo. He scrunches up his nose, words tumbling out quickly. They have white animal masks on their faces all the time. They've been watching me since I was a baby, you know that, Datbeo. It's like they have nothing better to do with their lives, ya know. Naruto. The chunin yells again, this time, with a darker edge than what Tsunade thinks is necessary for academy teachers. Uruka. He's mad though and Tsunade Haim couldn't blame him for it. Many citizens had escaped, albeit wounded and traumatized, from the Kyuubi demon because of the Anbu, yet this child dares to disparage their courage. When the child minutely flinches, a split second of fear and pain flashing across his eyes, Uruka feels a sliver of guilt in him. Uruka knows that the child isn't the Kyuubi and definitely wasn't responsible for any of the casualties, but amongst the whispers of the crowd and the mass isolating the boy, he couldn't help but watch and stand by, hoping that some part of the Kyuubi no Kitsune was suffering. Who was he joking? Hokage-sama had told you, Iruka. He's a Jinchuriki. The jailer of the monster. Not the monster itself. You know that. But that arose the question. How did the civilians even hear about Naruto's circumstance? They shouldn't have been privy to that information. It was an S-rank secret and anyone below high-level Chunin status weren't meant to know. And even then, the information hadn't been properly absorbed. The process of Fuinjutsu doesn't connect with the villagers, and as soon as they heard Kyuubi, in the same connotation as Naruto, they had ignored everything else. Such is the important part about how Naruto was not the Kyuubi. Kyuubi child this. Kyuubi child that. Parts of Iruka judges the civilians for being so shallow-minded, but when he thinks of his parents' backs because shinobi couldn't lose sight of their target, he could only see their deaths and the fox that caused it. When he sees the boy, he could only see the 3 whisker marks on the boy's face, and not how the boy looks exactly like Minato-sama and Kushina-san. He could only see how this boy was related to the Kyuubi, connected to the Kyuubi. You mean, he was burdened with the Kyuubi and all the hatred that came with it. Iruka knew his hypocrisy. He knew it deep down in him, but it was so much easier blaming the boy that everyone else was blaming. He watches the glimmer of panic wash away as the boy dumped a obviously fake, sulking look over his features. The ability to wipe away and seal off emotions was something that even most Chunin couldn't do, but the conditions the boy had been through made the action easy as breathing to him. Iruka remembers how every single morning there'd be it's the KY, that dejected, saddened look on the boy's face. Shish, can't talk about the movement as the child had hunched in over himself. Ka-san, why is he all alone? Hush sweetie, remember what I told you. That boy is what I was talking about. My name is Uzumaki Naruto, Dadbyo. Iruka had flinched at his loudness like he didn't know it was a desperate action into getting attention. You better remember it. Remember son, it's not a normal boy. In fact, Iruka remembers standing there, pretending to check the role that he had marked long ago on his clipboard. Iruka remembers ignoring the boy that had sat on the old swing under the shade of the tree. Most say that it's not really a boy at all. Iruka remembers walking past the sobbing child. How old had he been then? 5 or 6. Hokage-sama had enrolled the boy into academy really early after all. Iruka remembers thinking. Even the Hokage had wanted to wash his hands of that boy. Iruka now thought. A child shouldn't have to have that ability to store away emotions. The boy grumbled slightly and Iruka was dismayed as he realized that he could only see a mischievous class clown. Naruto had built up a wall that children should never have to build and he couldn't even read past it. Iruka knew that the blonde boy in front of him used to shake in fear and anger. No one would be able to tell from his frivolous gestures. Tsunade. Those were signs of past verbal abuse. Why would an academy teacher? And that was when the dots connected. Uzumaki. Kushina. Minato. This was the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Did the alcohol eat away at her brain? No wonder. No wonder. That's a bit of a mean tone for a teacher, don't you think? Tsunade murmurs and the Chunin snaps his gaze to hers before his eyes dart about shamefully looking for an excuse probably. These shinobi were so bad at hiding physical indications of their mental process. Did Ibiki die? Did Inoichi go lax? Actually that would explain the Yamanaka heiress's frivolousness. What had Sarutobi been doing? But that's impressive. She turns to Naruto. Tsunade inwardly starts grinning. Not only was she incredibly intrigued with this boy, it would also piss off the council a lot if she were to take him as an apprentice. Jinchuriki were human weapons of war and to make him a med nin was to pull him out of the battlefield. It was an unspoken rule that she couldn't take the last Uchiha as an apprentice because, well, he was the last Uchiha. The Sharingan Dojutsu being awakened and utilized for the benefit of the village was first priority. It was the same for Naruto, but that information was confidential. Officially, Tsunade didn't know who and what Naruto is. If the elders protest against it, using an excuse like, "You must have known. It's obvious," or, "Everyone knows," then they'd just have to admit of their incompetence at keeping an S-rank secret, well, a secret. And they were so desperate, they wouldn't dare to force her to change apprentices. With Naruto's hereditary large reserves, his natural potential and his enthusiasm, Iryo ninjutsu well, once Tsunade tackles it into him, would be extremely beneficial for everyone. Being the potential son of Kushina and Minato, their chakra natures would undoubtedly be somewhat passed down. Managing to trick, sneak past and evade Anbu, it took serious trickery and skill. Untapped skill that was. Her mind races through the few things she had learnt so far. Countless pranks. Avoiding Anbu and legitimate shinobi. That already ticked off. Trapping skills, potential fuinjutsu capability, stealth, basic creativity, smarts and instincts, courage, definitely guts, perseverance and. Her mental grin widens. Tsunade had never felt such an urge to learn about someone before. How could someone so bright and hated be so happy yet lonely at once? How could the Yondaime's child be treated as everything he wasn't? Yeah, I told you, Iruka-sensei. Naruto yells, and Tsunade would need to work on that volume. I'm super amazing, I'll become the best Hokage one day, just you believe it, Datbeo. Tsunade has to mechanically inhale to stop the memories from overcoming her. Why Hokage? Tsunade pretends that his bright, awe-filled smile didn't shatter her heart. Dan, Nawaki. Because. I will get stronger and stronger until everyone will have to acknowledge and respect me. Believe it, Datbeo. She represses the urge to back up from the in-your-face enthusiasm. There must be a reason to his loud repetitiveness after all. It's something else to think about as well. Please, Tsunade-sama, do not mind what the boy says. He is but a. Did I ask for your opinion, Chunin? Tsunade turns a cold, assessing eye over the teacher. Here they were having a nice, casual conversation. You mean? Emotional and traumatic conversation. You're fooling yourself, Tsunade, and this little brat decided he had the audacity. She makes a show of judgmentally scanning him up and down. He had a well-kept attire and lead smudges all over his right hand. His overall stance screamed of a well-behaving, respectful and dedicated teacher. I want to listen to what Naruto says. Tsunade pointedly pronounces. Not the boy, but Naruto. You may not, nay, the entire village may not, but I care for his opinion. The man looked kind, honest and sweet, yet the majority of the village was kind, honest and sweet. What of the treatment of Naruto? The citizens were all respectful and generous, yet as soon as one in power whispers a nasty word, they turn their backs, cast their minds. She remembers when Orochimaru was the one being glared at, avoided and ignored. I'm gonna HNRGHH, I'm gonna punch their lights out. Stop it, Tsunade, Jiraiya had hissed, hand over her mouth. It was probably the only time where he had manhandled her without a perverse intent. You're causing a ruckus. How could you, Raya? She had looked at him with an aghast expression. I thought you were better than that. Take a look around you. Jiraiya's eyes had flicked around and she reluctantly turned to glance around at the civilians inching away from the trio with an expression of disapproval. Look at your friend, she had hissed back, completely undeterred. Jiraiya was so fiercely protective of his precious ones, yet for some reason, the only time his common sense came into play, it was in this kind of scenario. It's okay, Tsunade. Orochimaru had smiled slightly before Jiraiya got the chance to assess the other boy's facial emotions. It's always been like this. It's not meant to be like that. There's nothing you can do about it anyway. Orochimaru had smiled again, albeit more sadly and gently, folding his arms into his kimono sleeves. I'm happy enough with the two of you caring for me. The pendant that laid upon her bone had never felt so present before. Her hatred for Hokage was ever growing, and she felt so cynical in the face of Naruto's persevering smile. Here she was as a Sannin with two of her most beloved dead, and there he was as a shunned orphan with no one to fall back upon. She had lost a lot, yet he had nothing at all. Comparing circumstances didn't matter in this case because ultimately, he was the one with a smile, he was the one that hadn't given up. If she had stayed with that little, sad, stupidly curious and annoyingly smartass boy, he was younger than Tsunade by a year, did you know, would Orochimaru have still joined Anbu? Still joined Root? Still left the village? Been so badly mutilated that she wouldn't have been able to recognize him anyway? Those words had haunted her like Nawaki and Dan's deaths had. Like how Orochimaru's carefully blank, but she could always read past his facade, but inwardly shell-shocked and sorrowful expression had haunted her. He will die young. A menacing voice hissed. Uzumaki Naruto will die young like your Dan and your Nawaki. Hokage is a fool's title. A title bleeding with suicidal motives. He won't die young. She replied to that voice for the first time since Dan's death. As long as I'm here, as long as I welcome him, he will not. Tsunade doesn't know why she was acting so out of character. At any sign of Nawaki or Dan, she would have fled. At the thought of Hokage, she would have sneered. That optimism usually pissed her off, but it didn't. Yet it wasn't the elders' threats that held her ground, it was something of Naruto that made her stay and fight against her own miserable self. Maybe she was just tired of feeling old and drunk, or maybe she just felt like kicking her sadness in the ass. Maybe. There's nothing you can do about it anyway. Maybe Tsunade just wanted to relish in the fact that now, she could do a thing about it. The classroom stared with agape mouths as a legend defended the boy, and not just any boy, it was that boy. They felt a bubbling indignation at that boy. Their parents were right. Over the years, they had slowly started to ignore their parents' whispers. After all, that boy was just a stupid, pranking idiot. He was a clown that couldn't do anything. But now they understood. That boy was manipulative and tricky. Like a fox, they had snarled with a hatred they had not understood. It happened every time their parents got into a heated discussion, slightly drunken slurs, a ghastly, demon fox. Tsunade-sama was so mean to Ino-chan and Sakura-chan, the two most popular girls, and yet she was so nice with that boy. What trick did he use? How did he fool Tsunade-sama? No wonder their parents had told them to stay away from that boy. That boy that everyone hated, ostracized and avoided. Some students opened their mouths to recite the words of their elder generation. Tsunade-sama, you do not know. You must stay away from that boy, he is a demon, a dangerous vermin. But a single look from their sensei silenced them. That was strange because sensei usually didn't care much for it. They all knew that the senseis all hated that boy, they weren't stupid. I've decided. Tsunade-sama raised an arm to point at that boy. Once you become genin, I'll be taking you as my disciple. The classroom tasted her words in their mouths, silently repeating it to themselves. Once he became genin. At that reminder, oh right, they had almost forgot. That boy was all bark no bite, just a hateful rat with no skills to back up upon. Tsunade-sama would get rid of him sooner or later anyway. Once he became genin, yeah, right. Like that was going to happen any time soon. Or ever. They burst into derisive laughter. I've decided. Tsunade-sama raised an arm to point at that boy. Once you become genin, I'll be taking you as my disciple. The classroom tasted her words in their mouths, silently repeating it to themselves. Once he became genin. At that reminder, they burst into derisive laughter. Ino Shika Cho. Yamanaka Ino was ashamed. Okay. Tsunade Hime was completely correct, and she knew it. She had initially clutched onto the idea that Sasuke was an Uchiha, the last Uchiha, which meant that he held lots of power as the lone survivor. If Ino could win his favor, When he would be inevitably raised to spawn off more dojutsu babies, via Yamanaka and Uchiha clan blood, Ino could come in close and snatch the political power. Even if she didn't get into a marital contract, being in the favor of someone who would become a large figure in society was always a bonus, or so she had first thought. Ino was the heiress, the pride of Yamanaka. Pray tell, are you even considering your own name? And she had forgotten all the psychological lessons her dad had drilled into her. Her dad had always lectured that, the problem with being prodigiously intelligent, Ino, is that your greatest setback is your own mind. She had been easily drawn into the rhythm of, Sasuke-kun, Sasuke-kun. Sure, he was a pretty boy with a perfect face and even more perfect talents, but he was 12 and had symptoms of many mental illnesses. The two facts were only scraping the tip of the iceberg of everything Yamanaka Ino did wrong. She had threw herself at the Uchiha, twisted a sweet friends into a rivalry for him, screeched at him, cheered at him when he clearly hated it. Ino, honey. Her dad's eyes hadn't been patronizing yet she had felt insulted by his expression anyway. You're young and that translates to immature. She stopped preventing the attempts of other girls trying to stalk Sasuke a few months back and had felt absolutely no remorse. You've changed. Look at yourself. Her dad's eyes had been taken aback. Ino. You don't understand anything, Dad. She had yelled back, stomping to her room and slamming the door shut. I don't want to talk to you. How horrible. How unbecoming. She jolted out of her thoughts at the sudden cacophony of laughter. Yamanakas were shinobi of the mind. As soon as Tsunade Haim had cleared the cloud in her head, she could see everything clearly all of a sudden. The blinded hatred in her classmates' eyes, Hinata's idolization, Kiba's anger and Shino's too, though well hidden. Shikamaru had a deeply attentive and intense look on his face, laziness slapped clear out of his face while Choji had crunched a single C, the smiling softness and kindness disappearing as he furrowed his brow worryingly. Sasuke's hands were still clasped in front of his face, but Ino could see the whites of his knuckles as he narrowed his eyes. She gave an airy laugh as she realized that Naruto had probably been the closest to Sasuke rather than her or Sakura. And Sakura Ino daren't look at that girl. That was a problem for another day. Naruto himself, Ino realized as she filed through her recent memories with clear eyes, was amazing at hiding emotions. Telltale signs of abuse and trauma were so deeply hidden that many could brush it off as the child being overreactive or hyper-enthusiastic. Ino grimaced when she recalled all the careless insults she had thrown at the boy. She would definitely fix it. She would definitely fix everything she had screwed up over her years in the academy. It was a long list of things to mend, but damn it. Ino was the Yamanaka heiress and she will not let her name down ever again. Akamichi Choji liked the new flavor of CS he had been recommended, but it tasted bland as he watched his friend Naruto getting laughed at again. Wait, it wasn't again, because this kind of laughter was different. It was a nasty sound, and it was even worse than when. Fatty, why are you eating so much anyway? You'd make a shitty ninja. You're the clan heir, you know that, don't you? He shook the memories out of his head. He sneaked a glance at his classmates and almost flinched at the hateful looks on their faces. His gaze turned back to Tsunade Haim. He had first felt a little uncomfortable as Ino, the loud, confident girl he had always seen when their dads met up, was getting told off. Even though she yelled at Choji a lot, she was still going to become his teammate, so he didn't want the Sannin to be so mean. But now he knows that Tsunade Haim had said the right thing when Ino hadn't gotten sad or hurt, instead, contemplative. Every time Inoichi Ojisan had that look on his face, he was always going to do something super smart or super awesome, so Choji was sure that after Tsunade Haim's words, Ino would finally stop being that air-headed fangirl that Choji and Shika always knew she was pretending to be. Ino had been cool to hang out with before the Sasuke fangirling came in after all. His respect for the Sannin grew. Especially after she had just given a little humorous huff when he had shoved in another handful of CS. Tsunade Haim was a cultured person barbecue CS rocked. It made him feel worse for Naruto, who was in the dead center of the classroom's negative attention. It wasn't like Choji had the guts to actually defend him either. He crunched more ferociously on his snacks and decided that he'd make sure to bring Naruto an extra packet of CS the next day. Because that's what friends did for each other, right? Nara Shikamaru was thinking. And for once, it wasn't because he was trying to figure out what that pear crocodile-shaped cloud looked like. No, it was about the enigma of Uzumaki Naruto. Now, none of those idiots who were laughing would ever think like this, but Naruto, who was loud and screamed everything, was more mysterious and elusive than Sasuke. He had always known something was off about the blonde, but it wasn't until Tsunade Haim's appearance that it finally clicked in his mind. He had felt surprised at the fact that someone was talking to Naruto. Normally he was so used to watching everyone sneer at the boy after all. It disgusted him when Shikamaru realized that he had let himself be manipulated into seeing Naruto as a lesser person, accepting how Naruto would always be, that boy. He delved into everything Naruto had screeched and came up with almost no information of his actual being. I'm going to be Hokage, Datbeo. I'll beat ya all TT Ibeo. Just watch me, I'll definitely ace this TT Ibeo. Everyone knew he would say that because he did almost every single day, and they would all claim that he talked too much, yet all of Naruto's hollers had been meaningless. Just plain calls for attention. And even then, they were all in vain. What did Shikamaru know about Naruto anyway? He was an 11-year-old orphan with blonde hair, blue eyes and whisker marks. He wanted to be Hokage. He was hated. He was about the loneliest kid Shikamaru had ever met. And Shikamaru didn't even figure that out from Naruto himself telling him. It was all the information provided through pure observation. The only information the boy had given himself. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. It's Uzumaki Naruto, and you better remember it. Believe it. I'm Uzumaki. ... That was it then. Why did he holler his name out all the time anyway? At that point, why did all the adults call him that, or boy, or brat, all the time anyway? When the questions started rolling, it just kept building and building with more unanswered queries. Why was he hated? Why did no one approach him? Why did the senseis ignore him? Why did his old man ask him about Naruto with that scarily serious expression? Shikamaru was amazingly smart, yet his laziness had caused all these things to slip past his fingers. He closed his eyes and his old man's grave face flashed behind his lids. It's one thing to use laziness for efficiency, son. It's another thing if it pulls the wool over your eyes. His eyes narrowed and a sliver of uncommon resolve shot down his spine. He recalled the harsh but true words of Tsunade Haim and recalled how he had uncharacteristically latched onto her every word. A bounty of information, truthfully tumbling out of her powerful figure, was just standing there patching up the sobbingly disgraceful mess of a classroom in a matter of minutes. Single quote ... Maybe not patched up. Shikamaru winced as a neighboring seatmate heaved mirthfully, but it knocked sense back into our heads. Some heads were already empty, those stupid laughing simpletons, but some heads were just clouded. Ino and Sakura, they had changed so much. He saw Ino, saw Choji, saw Hinata, saw Kiba and Shino, even Sakura's saccharine smile was absent. And most of all Sasuke. 9 of them all were changing, evolving, reaching the potential they had kicked aside. Damn it. A class full of clan heirs, the next generation of practical geniuses, yet they had all gotten caught up in their own heads. To Tsunade Haim, it might have just been some measly brats getting what they deserved, but Shikamaru was certain that it would greatly affect the 9 of them. Naruto included. Himself included. It was just the first step. The first step means the world. The snickers and hollers of hateful humor just stirred him more, unfamiliar waves of anger wrapping around his stomach. He sat up straighter from where he had hunched his back and his fingers tapped each other as he focused and absorbed. The students, the reactions, emotional setting, Tsunade Haim, his future teammates, and most importantly, the whys and the hows and the what-ifs of. His eyes centered onto the blonde boy. Of Uzumaki Naruto. Never again, old man. Shikamaru internally seethed. I will never let something slip through my grasp again. Future Team 8. If Hyuga Hinata was a brave, strong and courageous girl, she would have slammed her palms onto the table and flared her Byakugan in anger. Those people didn't know Naruto-kun like she did. How dare they? But if she was brave, strong or courageous, she would have been a good heiress. Her father wouldn't have been so disappointed in her in the first place. At that thought, she just hunched over herself more and tried to convey her support for Naruto-kun through split-second glances. Don't listen to them, Naruto-kun. She wanted to say. Don't let them dishearten you. Well, obviously, because she wasn't that popular, courageous, perfect heiress, Hinata doesn't do anything. She clenched her fist and looked down. What could she do to help Naruto-kun anyway? She had so many other problems of her own to fix. She then remembered Tsunade Haim's second of pause as her heavy brown eyes had assessed her, dismissing her instantly. Tsunade Haim hadn't even deemed her strong enough to take criticism. She wanted to help Naruto-kun, but at this rate, she could only stand by from afar. She really should start working on her own issues, and her strengths. You three, Tsunade Haim's voice rang in her head, were supposedly good at chakra control. Promising candidates for apprentices. To the others, it might have been brushed off, but to Hinata, who has never heard a compliment in all 11 years of her life, it was a beacon of light. Hinata wasn't usual, no. Hinata was promising. She could start with that. But now, she had no bravery to stand up against the class. Even if they were a class of ignorant fools. Inuzuka Kiba's eyes flicked away from the Hyuga girl and back to Naruto. It was pretty darned obvious that she admired him, but Kiba didn't understand why she would. Naruto was she crap at everything. That's why Kiba would usually laugh at that statement as well, but something about those peals of giggles just sent warning bells ringing in his head. His mom had told him not to play with that boy, and when he had asked why, she had snarled a surprisingly hostile, "Hell as I know why. Hokage-sama told us that, so do what I tell you." God. Kids these days, no respect. Of course Kiba hadn't listened to his mom, approaching Naruto the very next day. I played with Naruto today. He had declared really loudly the next week, hoping to urge on an aggravated reaction from his mom. But contrarily, she had just given a serious sigh and said, "Thank God you did that predictable and annoying brat thing where you disobey me." His mom had muttered under her breath. Heavens, that poor kid had no one to go to. Kiba had displayed a shocked expression, and when he had guiltily admitted that he had only hung out with Naruto to spite her, she hadn't yelled at him, only giving a short blank look before turning back to her groceries. That reaction had scared Kiba even more. "I know that," she had replied after the guilty silence. "But you know better now, don't you?" "Of course you would. You're my son after all." A sharp but fond grin had faced him. "And I always like to adopt little lonely pups into our pack." Kiba thought Naruto was annoying, loud and hopeless, but that didn't mean that he didn't care just a tiny bit for him. At first, hanging out with Naruto was for his own childish benefits, but he thinks that it might have changed throughout their years of academy because he feels a flare of protective anger within him at the cackles of ear-grating laughter. Aburame Shino adjusted his position so that he could peer at Naruto over the haze of his glasses. Kiba was angry. Why? That's because even though his brain was full of dog fur, Kiba knew that this kind of laughter wasn't the usual bantering kind. Kiba had laughed with Naruto and at Naruto a lot of times. But while Kiba had spouted biting taunts and mocks, he had still cared for the blonde boy. Shino could tell. Why? That's because his Kikaichu told him so. His Kikaichu also told him that Naruto was always lonely and sad. They told him that his chakra was boundless and open like the sea and how it would tumble and crash every time a hateful glance was shot his way. For him to be able to slap on a smile every day. Shino's respect for him had unknowingly grown leaps and bounds. He hadn't realized that until now. Why? That's because, for once, his unruffled expression was forced. He was also angry on behalf of Naruto. Tsunade. She certainly didn't expect the sudden apprehension. Fear and confusion flit across the boy's face, and when the Chunin hurriedly hissed out a sentence under the laughter of the class, she frowned. Naruto here had failed the graduation exam twice now. She stared at the boy in front of her, knowing that her gaze was both an encouragement, a challenge and a taunt. The two stood there, facing each other, and Tsunade broke the stare off when raw determination shone in Naruto's eyes with a grin. I'll definitely pass the exam this time, just you wait, Iruka-sensei. And random lady. Naruto. An angry Haruno appeared suddenly and raised a fist. Don't talk to the legendary Tsunade-sama like that. Naruto recoiled, bracing himself from impact while Tsunade furrowed her brows in thought. The sudden personality change wasn't unheard of in shinobi, but they weren't common among civilians. If Haruno hadn't been so squealy and brainlessly violent, Tsunade would have chosen her as an apprentice. She showed lots of wasted potential. Sorry about that, Tsunade-sama. Haruno flicked a pink lock over her shoulder in a way that reminded her of the Yamanaka. You shouldn't pay attention to that idiot. He's always like that. Her voice darkened, rude and stupid. Tsunade caught a slip of annoyed irritation in Naruto's face before a kicked puppy expression slid over like a familiar mask. Sakura-chan, so mean. And just like that, the class burst into rowdiness. Students turning to each other to whisper conversations, the fangirls squealing and the boys grumbling and chatting, some even dropped asleep. The Chunin muttered, I'm so done with this. The classroom atmosphere returned with its usual frivolousness, but Tsunade recognizes the dark undertones to their conversations and gossiping. Naruto turned to scan the class for a seat but then hesitated and turned back to Tsunade. What's so legendary about you? Somehow, Sakura had also managed to hear Naruto's lower than usual voice over the cacophony of boisterous students. Naruto baka, didn't you listen to anything sensei had been talking about during class? So stupid. Tsunade-sama is one of the legendary Sannin, the war heroes that got their name during the Second Shinobi War against Hanzo of the Salamander, don't you know? Tsunade nearly raised her brow at the quickly summarized and accurate information before she saw how the girl glanced at the Uchiha from the corner of her eye. But Sakura-chan, this lady looks so young. Ibeo. Naruto gasped before saying slowly. Are you secretly a? The boy eyed Tsunade up and down. Quote. Baba. Naruto. Sakura growled before she raised her fist again. This time, Tsunade intercepted the punch with ease, batting away her stick limb. I don't need you to defend me. Tsunade scoffed before pushing back the aggressive urge to punch the boy herself. I'll give you a warning, boy. She caught yet another flash of dejection. Naruto. She corrected herself. If you call me one more time, I'll punch you myself, and that would hurt 1,000 times worse than anything this pink brat could do, capiche? Si, como dices, hermosa jovencita. He muttered back reflexively with a sarcastic tone before Tsunade, with the rest of the class falling silent, raised both brows. That was a popular southwestern Iwagakure language. Chato. Naruto. Fangirl number 3 demanded. Where did you learn how to say that? Papa's a merchant and he says that only foreigners from Tsuchi know how to say that kind of language, and Iwa is an enemy village. Tsunade gave a glance at the boy who looked surprised at his own words before his face tilted on the verge of panicking. Where had he learned of those words anyway? As incompetent as Sarutobi was, there'd be no way he'd let Naruto go near foreigners. The tone of his voice and the accent that rolled naturally off the boy's tongue were things that couldn't be faked. She was already suspicious after knowing Naruto's familiarity with the Anbu. There could be a possibility that Sarutobi let him meddle with the Yakuza or Yuho. There lay a possibility that a few of them were originally nomadic. Don't get ahead of yourself, Akako. The Chunin said, looking a tad uncomfortable. There's no need to jump to conclusions. But Iruka-sensei, fangirl number 8 announced over loudly. Our parents all tell us that he's a horrible child and that he doesn't even have mummies or daddies. Anyone would be able to tell that that was shady. The Chunin raised his voice a little over the growing murmurs. There are many orphans and that isn't something you may discuss in the classroom. Many merchants and travelers pick up simple phrases like that. It's nothing to get heated over. His tone pushed for an end, but Tsunade knew that it wouldn't work. She resisted the urge to bite her lip. She hadn't come to orchestrate a soap opera. There was no way she would have known that the doubt was planted so deeply. What triggered it anyway? Something, she said. Her kinder attitude. Was it jealousy? The animosity of the room was growing slowly but surely. Yeah, sensei. Another piped in. You already know, don't you? That's why you all hate him so much. You must think so as well. Sensei doesn't agree with us. Tsunade thinks that their shouts were starting to barrage over, disrespectful. Of course Sensei would know, don't you, Iruka-sensei? You know that he's that, don't you? Hushed whispers of, my parents told me he was a monster. Attacked our village. Killed Granny, you know. Doesn't belong here. Chato. Haruno started hesitantly, glancing slightly at the blank expression of Naruto before back at her classmate. Naruto is annoying, but you can't speak so hatefully towards him. He hadn't done that much to deserve it. Her expression turned even more hesitant. Has he? It was like a cue for an explosion of shouts. Sakura-chan, your parents are too nice, so they didn't tell you how there was such a monster inside of our classroom. And that just confirmed it. A boy triumphed. Sakura-chan, did you hear him say that Iowa word? He's definitely not Konohan. No wonder our parents had wanted him to get kicked out. That's right, that's right. A chorus of agreements rang out yet again and amongst the shouts. His parents are probably traitors from an enemy village. The room goes silent. Tsunade resisted the urge to place her forehead into her palm. The escalation of events was ridiculous. She had come here to complain and she ended up ripping apart the Lalaland of immature brats. She wasn't prepared for this. Naruto, for the first time since he had donned his happy mask and screamingly orange clothes, fled. There were some things he couldn't face. And, traitor, was one of them. No matter who his parents were, he would never betray Konoha. He loved Konoha. Sakura. Tsunade Haim's words had sent a shockwave through her, blasting her head from where it had been lollygagging around in her fantasies. It shook her to the core. The expression on her face wasn't even hateful, it was just patronizing, disappointed and a tad sad. Sakura almost wanted her to spit out insults, but no, everything the Sannin had said was true. I would think the top, kunoichi, of the class would know better than that. Love clouds the mind, it perseveres through all, is what she might have said if she would have continued to be stubborn and stupid. Obviously, I am not taking any of you three as apprentices. After all her mistakes had been thrown into her face, Sakura herself didn't feel ready to leave the academy, much less becoming an apprentice. And you, Haruno, highest grading kunoichi, how did you manage to do that? With that repulsive farce of a sweet girl you are trying to pull? That statement had spoken for itself. Sakura's prodigious control over chakra was what first triggered the idea of shinobi. Her parents had jumped in glee, speaking about the heroic acts of beautiful kunoichi. Femme fatale. Her mum had gushed to her daughter. Bring honor to our Haruno name. Her dad had smiled widely. Then after 2 or so years in the academy, she had been slapped awake. Shinobi were shinobi. Some days, She had stared at the long list of Kia shinobi on the stone and wondered whether or not they regretted becoming a shinobi. You've become less ladylike. Her dad had frowned. Why are you so serious now? Her mum's brows had been downturned. Studying all day on ways to kill people. From that day on, Sakura had sat with her legs together, walked stiffly so that her dress wouldn't stretch, grew her hair into a beautiful waist length, clasped her hands together and raised her brows slightly so that her eyes would be bigger and cuter. Sasuke-kun had no longer been a subject of interest, it had become a crush verging on obsession. Scratch that, it was obsession. Inner had appeared that same day. Then after another few years, those nihilistic thoughts on shinobi had left. Inner grew louder. Academy was for ninja and the academy wasn't scary at all. Inner grew scarier. Sasuke-kun was hot and Ino Pig was her rival. Naruto Baka was stupid and she forgot everything about the life of a shinobi. Those deaths had never sunk in. The risk had never fully processed in her mind. She couldn't imagine seeing blood outside of a blood nose or a scraped knee. She couldn't imagine seeing fights outside of Naruto Baka wrestling with Sasuke-kun and losing as always. Tsunade Haime's eyes burnt into her, yet all it took was the clueless expression on Naruto's face. It was like a trigger for everything to happen like it usually did, his ignorant face slapping the play button on where the classroom had halted. It was like instinct because of how many times she had done it. How easy it was to respond to that tugging of inner, an aggressive movement flying out of her thin limb like second nature. How easy it was to prattle off information, peeking to see if Sasuke-kun had witnessed her intelligence. How easy it was to sneer at Naruto's ever-present stupidity. He deserved a punch, a reprimand, and then he would give a despondent apology. That didn't happen. Well, it did, but if she squinted, she could tell that everything had gone wrong somewhere. The laughter, it sent shivers up and down her spine. It made her feel like a hypocrite because she was just as prepared to laugh at Tsunade Haime's statement as the rest of the class was. As if Naruto could pass the genin exam. He slept during class, skipped out on lectures, caused constant trouble and didn't even take notes. Sakura was always annoyed at Naruto for declaring to become Hokage then falling asleep during an important lecture. There were a wealth of information that he lost purely because of his laziness. Then he gets sad about failing a test as if it wouldn't have obviously happened. Sakura was prepared to list every reason why he wouldn't pass when Naruto uttered a foreigner's phrase. At that moment, she had halted. She hadn't thought, traitor, or foreigner, she had thought, I didn't know that Naruto knew that, with a sort of strange curiosity. How did he learn it? Was it simply overheard? If so, then did Naruto have more talents? More hands-on than actually taking notes? Would Naruto actually be successful if someone privately tutored him? Was there a reason why he couldn't focus during class? There were many psychological factors Sakura could list that could hinder his growth. But obviously her classmates hadn't shared the same sentiment, whispering and murmuring with so much hidden acidity that she felt like ice had frozen across the room. A snicker was filled with derision, a giggle was menacing, those chortles were full of brimming hatred. It was so unlike them. Hanako-kun was always so cheerful and playful, Aina-chan was helpful and caring, Hima was soft and sweet and why? She was on the verge of crying in fear and weakness just from being near the target of those disgusted, scornful stares. But the actual target was. When she shot a glance at that annoying, rude, dumb, lazy and lame blonde boy, she was tearful and slightly bewildered to see that Naruto just looked accepting. Accepting. Motionless. Unfeeling. Tired. Blank. Smile please. Sakura internally cried. Smile that stupid, ugly grin that makes me squint at how bright it is. Naruto did not smile. He disappeared, shooting out the window with the speed Sakura had never seen from the practice spars or the taijutsu assessments before. The window clicked shut with a dull thud and she felt shocked. Naruto had left before Sakura had a chance to sort out her emotions. Why would he wait for you? Before Sakura had a chance to defend Naruto against her ex-friends. Ho, are you attached now? Before Sakura had a chance to apologize. What would you apologize for? Before Sakura had a chance to tell Naruto that she didn't mean all the insults and punches and mocks and taunts and dismissals, and God, there was so much things she had spat at the boy, and it was only now when she felt remorseful. Maybe if Sakura hadn't been blinded by her obsession with Sasuke, she would have been nicer to Naruto. If she had helped him, would he have stopped with his exaggerated pining and scrambles for attention? Would she have supported his dream? Would he have been a good friend to Sakura? Sakura wouldn't lie to herself and say that his foolery was the only reason why she had disliked him. No, she had also disliked him because Naruto was the only person who could get a reaction out of Sasuke. Sakura had disliked someone because of a stupid crush. And now look, she only felt guilty after it was too late. She thought she had disliked Naruto, but in the face of those eyes, she'd rather ditch all her fake, two-faced friends with Hanako, Aina and Hima and stand with Naruto. You realized just now. You mean you just realized? Inner's voice whispered, how horribly wrong you have been. Inner. Sakura breathed in reply. Whose side are you on? Yours. Inner gushed back. I'm always on your side. Naruto. He hated running. Hated crying. Naruto didn't think it would happen again. The stares, the glares, the spit as they cursed at him, that boy, monster, and worst of all, traitor. There were many nights where he had just sat, staring at his bare, crumbling, dirty wall and thinking about his parents. Because as much as, monster, is whispered from where they thought he couldn't hear, Naruto knew that he had parents. He was human. He really was. But there's a strange look in the Hokage Jiji's eyes that he couldn't decipher. Sometimes it was pity, sometimes it was burden. Either way, Naruto didn't like it, but because he was selfish, he just let himself absorb the old man's warmth and love that may not be real. The one time he had asked about his parents, there was instant rejection. They're dead. And, they won't be coming back. Were the only pieces of information he got from the old man's suddenly abrupt speech. The Hokage had left soon after. That night, he stumbled onto the possibility that his parents might have been traitors. And today, majority of the class dug deep within his carefully held together facade and ripped out his worst fears, screaming them and howling them as if Naruto's own mind hadn't done so already. He wasn't a traitor. He really wasn't a traitor. It wasn't his fault or her fault that the Nichan from the strange building a few streets down was nice. It wasn't her fault that she came from a different place and had nowhere else to go. We aren't considered all that human, either, honey. The Nichan had smiled at him the one time he had dared trek into the dark grounds of those streets. He hadn't understood what she had meant that time. Everyone down here, you see, are not really counted as normal, but we're fine with it. It's better than anything else we could ask for. Naruto wasn't like that. He wanted to become Hokage. He wanted to be acknowledged. Those people were nice, but they were distant. They were from a world that Naruto felt like he didn't belong in. But when the pretty side of Konoha kicked him away, what else did they expect him to do? He loved the gruff geezers who looked scarier than they actually were, and he loved all the people who were clearly different in the village. He loved every time a Nichan would sit down with him and babble about her hometown. He loved it even more when they'd hum and sing foreign lullabies. I wanna learn to TT Ibeo. Ha ha ha, you're adorable. I'm a foreigner, sweetie. You will never be able to use my mother tongue here in Konoha anyway. I don't care, Datbeo. It's pretty, so I will learn your mummy mouth, believe it. Ha ha ha, it's mother tongue, darlin'. But they weren't scorned at. Even though they claimed to be less than human, like he, some villagers still gave sympathetic smiles and extra change sometimes, and Naruto wanted that kindness too. No, he wasn't a traitor. The person who taught him the phrase wasn't a traitor, so why? Why was it just him? Why has it always been him? They laid bare the side of him that was everything but the funny, stupid clown act he had spent years to maintain. They laid exposed his ugliest, rawest parts of his heart and mind. They laid true the real face of himself that everyone hated more, including himself. Naruto hates running, hates crying, but he couldn't think of anything else to do. Not when the eyes were staring at him like that. Class. There's a deafening silence. When the sound of the window clicking shut behind Naruto rang across the room, Sasuke snapped out of his trance. Scrambling up to his feet for a reason he didn't know, he hurried after the retreating blonde. It was wrong. This entire thing felt wrong. Naruto, that stupid idiot, was meant to stay like an idiot that could keep on his happy, bright, stupid face while Sasuke would just watch his back, squinting like one would at the sun. Sasuke would remain in the dark, dwelling in his vengeance while Naruto would be that aspiring Hokage that rose from his burdened childhood without an inkling of hatred or resentment. Sure, Sasuke had said that Naruto was weak and never acknowledged his presence outright, but there was a radiance about him that Sasuke wanted to selfishly keep. There was a strength that the dead last holds, and it was something that Sasuke knew he would never be able to grasp for himself. That's why Sasuke would just be in the shadows, jealously snatching all the warmth of the sun. He was to remain in the cold, and in the cold he will always remain. Because it was for a revenge that he did not want but had to achieve. It wasn't meant to be this way. Naruto was meant to argue back with that dumb, indignant face of his, yelling back with that obnoxious, ear-splitting voice that grated on his ears. Sasuke was meant to watch that loser defend himself with that baseless pride of his, yet he hadn't. Uzumaki Naruto was unbearable and demanding and loud and annoying and stubborn, and he wasn't meant to run. Sasuke's body moves on his own as he places a hand on the window, taking a cursory glance behind him to glare at his classmates before he swiftly slid outside, slamming the panel shut behind him and sprinting after Naruto. Naruto. His body leads him to the depths of the Hashirama forest. The tall, craning trees were intimidating, but not like Naruto had ever gotten scared of their overbearing presences. He'd much rather get lost in the forest than lost in the stairs. He had thought that he was finally fitting in, but looking back, he was still the same, wasn't he? Most of the class had instantly distanced themselves from him, and the ones who hadn't weren't much better. Shino ignored him. Hinata always looked away from him with a weird expression on her face. Kiba mocked him. Shikamaru and Choji were better, though they actually treated him like human. It meant nothing when they didn't understand the hurt he felt from the rest. It meant nothing when they didn't care. And they didn't. They always looked away, Choji looking down onto his snacks and Shikamaru rolling his eyes with a mutter of, troublesome. But it was fine. They didn't need to. Even though Naruto thought Shikamaru and Choji were his friends, doesn't mean they thought the same. He was probably still the annoying, dumb kid that was a stain on their prestigious clans. Naruto had thought Ino was better than the rest of the screaming girls. She was family friends with Shikamaru and Choji, but he was wrong. He had thought Sakura was better because she was nice when she was younger. He was wrong. They were all the same. It was like a wake-up call. They were all the same. He would always be trapped between the eyes and eyes and eyes, insults upon insults upon insults. Backs turned, brows raised, sneers facing him every single second. Meanwhile, class. Soon after the window clicked for the second time, Tsunade exhaled loudly with an aborted, sardonic laugh. She then left with a mutter of, reporting to Sarutobi, I guess. Iruka-sensei looked taken aback, stuttering slightly before he made out an, okay, settle down now, this commences our lesson today. Iruka-sensei had never looked so reluctant before. Class dismissed. He started walking away so quickly they all thought he was running. With sniggers and giggles, the classroom slowly rose to stand up. None of the remaining of the rookie 9 did, however. Hinata was staring at her empty desk. Kiba was still lazily leaning back with Akamaru by his side. Shino stayed stoic, making no move to pack his belongings. Ino was huffing slightly, sitting straight and glaring at the whiteboard. Shikamaru was leaning on his left palm as he spun a pencil, and Choji made no move to stop eating his endless supply of CS. Sakura still stood in the middle of the classroom, unmoving. "Hey Ino-chan, are you okay?" A random girl leaned down to glance at the Yamanaka. "Uruka-sensei let us leave early for once, do you want to go shopping?" "Hey, Mari-chan," Ino spoke with a deceptively nonchalant tone. "What do you think of Naruto?" The seven in the empty room stilled as they waited for Mari to reply. "Ha, Ino-chan, why are you asking? Didn't you hear what everyone said?" "Of course I heard, do you agree with them?" Ino let a thread of warning go into her tone, but Mari didn't notice the change of her tone. Mary's eyes grew wider as if she was curious, and Shikamaru sighed. Kiba gave a tisk as Mari predictably said. "Everyone knows that he doesn't belong in Konoha." It was like something snapped. Two hands slammed upon a desk, chair screeching as the Yamanaka stood up aggressively. She turned to Mari, who looked shocked. Ino slapped her. Brows downturned angrily, eyes brimming with unknown tears and face contorted into an ugly rage. Ino had never looked so terrifying to Mari before. The girl stumbled backwards before she registered the remaining occupants of the classroom all glaring just as viciously at her. Hinata's Byakugan, Kiba's feral glare, Shino's creepy stare boring into the girl, Shikamaru's narrowed eyes, Choji's silent frown, Sakura's suddenly ferocious expression, and Ino's glowing blue orbs. Mari staggered backwards for a moment before she fled from the classroom. Ino's hand burned with the amount of power she reinforced behind it, but right now, that sting was nothing compared to the feeling that was bubbling in her gut. "What the?" Her voice is watery and wobbly and weak. "She will definitely change that soon." Shikamaru gave a bitter scoff. "Right. I hate this." The children who would be renowned as the Konoha 11 in the future all agreed, though they didn't know what it was that they hated. The class, the unreasonable inequality, or maybe it was just this shinobi world altogether. In that moment, all those who hadn't laughed or jeered made an unspoken pact they would change it. Whatever it was that they hated. "Tomorrow," Sakura said hesitantly before steel entered her tone. "Tomorrow let's all change, yeah." Naruto. Never. He realized as he coldly sorted through his memories. They had never once cared for him. No one had ever asked him if he was okay. No one had ever asked why he was late. It didn't matter if that day was near his birthday and villagers' eyes were extra hostile for no reason. It didn't matter if that day there was a drunk villager who started screaming incoherently at him. It didn't matter if that particular night, he had had a horrible nightmare and an equally horrible sleep. It didn't matter if he couldn't wash himself properly because his landlord had forgotten to fix the broken, leaking water pipes. Again. At this point, Naruto already figured out that delaying the plumber was just his landlord's way of getting petty revenge. For what though? What had Naruto done? Nothing ever mattered to any of them, because Naruto would only ever be that boy. "Sasuke. That doby." Sasuke hissed into the wind. He watched as the brightly dressed figure disappeared between the buildings. Sasuke would never be able to figure out why he could run so fast. He bit his lip as he slowed his initial sprint into a hesitant jog. He had treated Naruto like trash the entire time. Who was he to care for the boy? Wait, that wasn't right. Sasuke didn't care for the boy. He recalled back to his earlier days and how he had stared into his reflection of the river while Naruto would trudge along the hill above. He remembered contemplating on calling out to that blonde boy when their eyes had made contact. Instantly, they had both looked away. They never ended up talking. When they faced each other in class, they had bickered, argued and choked each other by the necks, but they had never actually talked. Sasuke didn't care for the boy. No. He He really didn't. Sasuke didn't care for the boy. He only cared for one thing, and that was revenge. What was he doing? Chasing after the sun when his goals would only remain in the darkness. Naruto could deal with it anyway. He'll be fine tomorrow, like always. But Sasuke always hated cloudy days. It meant the rain and the cold, like the terrorizing nights he spent alone. Naruto. But maybe Sasuke was. Naruto forcibly shook his head. The boy that he had first hated and the boy he had then related to. Naruto had liked him. The eyes were both following them and they both hated it. Naruto selfishly liked Sasuke because only he knew what it was like to be alone. Naruto selfishly liked Sasuke because he was the only one who didn't have parents who would warn him to stay away from Naruto. No, it wasn't just that. Not like he'd ever admit aloud that he felt camaraderie to that lone boy. But even then, it was probably still one-sided. Getting a rise out of him in every possible moment, Naruto knew that Sasuke thought he was a nuisance. There was no way that genius would lower himself to speak to Naruto. Last Uchiha followed him like monster followed him. Sasuke was better than Naruto at everything, so why would he care for some orphan like he? Sasuke had regretted not talking to Naruto when he was younger. Sasuke didn't do things like regretting. So here he was, feeling utterly humiliated, panting with exhaustion after dozens of long minutes of searching, sweat on his brows, hair ruffled from wind and face flushed from exertion, standing in front of Dobi. Was the only thing Sasuke managed to say after cornering Naruto's shivering figure. Lodged deeply into the concave of a tree trunk, the boy Sasuke had been searching for was hidden expertly in the deep wilderness of the quiet forest. Sasuke reprimanded himself before gritting out a sorry. There's a low chuckle and it sounds like Naruto had grated his vocal cords against sandpaper. Never think I'd see the day where you'd apologize. All it takes is me acting like a loser to get you to pity me, huh? Tonkachi. Sasuke growled this time. Who said I pitied you? You're always a loser anyway. He then caught onto his words and winced at his tactlessness. There was a hesitation within him for talking to Naruto though. His voice was too low and too quiet. There was a glaring lack of his stupid verbal tick. Sasuke didn't know how to talk to Naruto. He didn't know whether or not it was meant to be harder talking to a Naruto who was serious and sad. Ya no, Tem, I think your insults are the only ones I like. Dobi. Sasuke hissed again, taken aback by the sudden, blatant comment. Don't say that, you're so embarrassing. Bastard. Sasuke didn't rise to the bait. What's wrong with you? He remembered what he came here for and crouched down, fruitlessly trying to pry the arms away from where Naruto had curled into a ball. Sasuke felt a hot, bubbling emotion simmering just under his skin. Get up. What the hell are you doing? He gritted his teeth with an anger he didn't understand. Why did you just let them say that? Sasuke started pulling at Naruto's hands instead when his eye-searing jacket started to creak, the seams groaning. Why didn't you argue back? Why didn't you say something? What the? You idiot. Naruto didn't reply and it just made Sasuke more mad. Reply. Say something. His aggravation made his throat thick and his voice sharp. He didn't like this Naruto. No, that wasn't right. He didn't like whatever was making Naruto like this. I didn't think you were so weak to run away from that. What are you doing? Stand up. Dead last, Sasuke started to violently yank on both of Naruto's wrists. What the are you doing? Get up, you absolute loser. And with a short yelp from the blonde, Sasuke finally managed to dislodge Naruto from where he had stubbornly attached himself to the tree. Naruto stumbled forward before collecting himself, knees hitting the ground in a child's sitting pose. Sasuke let himself pant for a second as he victoriously held Naruto's two arms away from his face. Now all he needed to do was. After 2 seconds of stillness, Naruto tilted his face up to glare half-heartedly at Sasuke. It had no heat in them. It wasn't the usual flaming and irritated blue orbs. Instead, there was just an iciness to them. A dispassionate cold stare. Not only that, but the faint feeling of triumph very quickly died in him as the Uchiha boy dropped his hands, still clasping on Naruto's wrists with a grip that was definitely too tight to be gentle. Why are you? His voice was shaking, but he didn't know whether or not it was from anger anymore. Sasuke slowly knelt down in a seiza to mirror Naruto, bobbing his head slightly lower and to the side so that they were at eye level with each other. Sasuke realized that his hand was quaking as it released one wrist, slowly moving it to Naruto's whiskered cheeks. He recoiled when the boy in front of him suddenly flinched right before his fingers made contact. Something deep within his chest softened and ached, leaving him feeling unfamiliarly vulnerable even though it wasn't him who was. Why are you crying? Hokage's office. Tsunade. Okay, Sarutobi. She declared curtly. I hate that academy class. Tsunade. I hate it so much. She slumped down on a chair before running a hand through her hair. Tsunade could feel disapproving eyes of onlookers boring into her skull. So what if she was so informal it was bordering on insubordination? She wanted to ask Sarutobi about how Naruto knew foreign phrases, but she had a feeling that he didn't know. Instead, a plan slowly started to form in her mind. But I've picked a few girls that I might take. Key word was might. Oh, so you've finally came to your senses. Sarutobi gave a small smile and Tsunade didn't even feel a smidge of guilt at giving a white lie. I haven't figured out who yet, they're all horrible. Tsunade sighed. Especially this one little blonde rascal who went rampant with pranks. She side-eyed Sarutobi and watched as his expression turned slightly annoyed and exasperate. That's just Naruto. A fine work, isn't he? I thought that he would start acting a bit more mature after some years in the academy, but. Oh ho, you know the name of some random kid. Sarutobi hummed in agreement. Naruto is a very lively boy, I've talked to him a few times. So Tsunade was not supposed to be privy to his Jinchuriki status. Perfect. Oh well, he disrupted the class and is clearly not suitable for the shinobi lifestyle. Are you really going to promote him in the next exams? The words burnt at her tongue, but she just cast a bored look at Sarutobi. Talking ill of Naruto's skill would make his apprentices be most unexpected. They should all quit, to be honest, but he's just the worst. Now, Tsunade, that boy may be young and immature, but there's a Jonin sensei for a reason. I believe Naruto will grow up sooner or later and become an excellent shinobi. The old man puffed out smoke. Is that all? Tsunade pretended to give a long-suffering sigh. Once I have chosen my disciple and get them to sign a permission slip, may I leave on a training trip? So soon? I'm planning on leaving as soon as they're filled in on the terms and ready. It's very hasty. The council didn't say I needed to run the hospital, so I'm dedicating myself to creating another competent med-nin like Shizune. Sarutobi stroked his chin. And for how long will this be? I want at least 3 years. Well, she was sure that Naruto didn't want to be back anytime soon. 3 years, he repeated with a narrowing of his eyes. That's an awfully long time. Academy student rank, remember? Tsunade rolled her eyes. I can't be bothered waiting around for whenever the genin exams will be. 3 years is the bare minimum if I'm going to make them a decent shinobi. If there's an emergency blah blah, I'll be back to act as your meat shield, okay? Now, look here Tsunade. Sarutobi. She pressed her lips together. This is my slug contract and my legacy here. Give me at least that many years. With a sigh, Sarutobi waved his hand. Fine. I'll see to your disciple becoming an upstanding shinobi. Rank at low-level chunin. At least. Tsunade gave a smile before she turned to leave. Once she was out of the building, her polite smile stretched into a satisfied smirk. Tsunade couldn't believe Sarutobi was that desperate to have not asked for her potential apprentice's identity. Maybe he would in the near future, but Tsunade was planning on hightailing out of Konoha with Shizune and Naruto ASAP. The next time Naruto will meet with that stinking class and these stinking shinobi, he'll be strong. Stronger than ever. Tsunade'll show them, Naruto'll show them all what it means to be Senju Tsunade's disciple. As long as she was around, Naruto will never be mocked by his ex-classmates, ex-peers ever again. Meanwhile, Mizuki, he dropped down to crouch beside the boy. Oh, hey Naruto-kun, he said with a small smile. His face switched to a sad expression as he took in the boy's expression. Are you alright? The Kyuubi boy looked at him with distrust and wariness. Mizuki-sensei. Yeah, I'm good. I was just taking a jog around the Hashirama forest. Iruka-san doesn't usually end early, does he? Mizuki gave the boy an encouraging smile. I heard once you become genin, you can leave with Tsunade Haim, that's amazing. A small grin danced across the boy's face and Mizuki inwardly smirked. Yeah, I know right. I'll beat the genin exam and become stronger and stronger, just you belie. But how are you going to pass? Mizuki tried to make the sentence less harsh by widening his eyes and raising his brows a bit, mouth turning into an O shape. I can tell you, Naruto-kun, that you fully deserve the genin rank, but your bunshins won't be able to pass. I'm so sorry. He watched as the emotion slowly started to war in the boy's eyes, watching as the light completely crumbled before. And there's another reason too. Mizuki lowered his face with a mock expression of despondence. You know that everyone hates you, right? No one's listening to me when I tell the other senseis that you're strong enough to graduate. I had heard of the incident in class. I'm sure you must want to graduate as soon as possible, don't you? No, well, I mean, don't worry, Naruto-kun. I have a solution. I will let you become genin. He dangled hope over the fox's stupid face. Mizuki was going to make Naruto beg for it. What? Really? Yes, it's a separate test and you could do it individually, so like, right now. You'll get an instant promotion to genin. Mizuki pasted on a cheeky smile. It's a secret one for real shinobi. It'll be more challenging, but it'll guarantee you your apprentices with Tsunade Haim. Mizuki figured that Naruto would be desperate to never see his class again. It was just a perfect chance for him to obtain the scroll. Orochimaru-sama will definitely remember him for this. What is it? What is it? Mizuki pretended to give him a hesitant look. Are you sure you're up to it, Naruto-kun? It might be too hard for you. There was a flicker of suspicion before it was visibly pushed aside by desperation and stubbornness. Ha! What a predictable brat. Yes, I am TT Ibeo, tell me. Please, please, please. When he placed a finger on his chin, a pondering look on his face, he felt a vicious rip of satisfaction. Checkmate. Fine then. So here's the plan, Naruto-kun. Half an hour later, Tsunade. The next thing she remembered after talking to Sarutobi was the hustle of Anbu and Shinobi. And now she was wandering in the shadows of the Hashirama forest. Why would Naruto? As she made a hand seal, chakra poking around, Tsunade slowly located the boy who was practicing Kage Bunshin. Her eyes widened minutely. Naruto actually stole the forbidden scroll. She cloaked her presence, hiding into the shadows as she noticed the incoming presence. A small rat Chunin scurried into the clearing, a smug look on his face. Well, Naruto-kun, you're amazing. You actually managed to do it. What a sleazy grin stretched across his face, his demeanor changing like a flip had been switched. Useful little freak. What? Pass it here, Naruto-kun. The rat Chunin's lips curled as he jutted a hand against one, the other beckoning the blonde boy closer. Now be a good little mongrel and give it here. Oh no way. Oh no-ing way. Mizuki, sensei. Naruto paused at the hostile tone, his character quieting down as his mind slowly sorted through the chaotic scene. What are you talking about? A traitor. Why was such a shitty shinobi able to infiltrate Konoha? How much were the shinobi here slacking off? I'm saying. Eyebrows raised in a mocking way, Mizuki smiled arrogantly down at the boy. I lied to you. Shit. Tsunade hesitated. Should she intercept? Maybe she should first rapport. Kyuubi boy. Mizuki gave a victorious smile as the boy froze, completely motionless. That son of a bitch. Quote. Wah what? Naruto blanched, a few beats of silence passing before he whispered, Q, bye. Naruto. If the classroom incident was like dropping off a cliff, Mizuki sensei's words were like being suffocated in boiling hot water. Those words rolled over him as ferociously as he imagined an ocean would have, making him feel violently dizzy and nauseous. He feels scared and so terribly uncomfortable, cold yet hot at the same time. Who knew about it? Who doesn't? You see, the Yondaime Hokage hadn't actually killed the Kyuubi per se. Would people care? Stupid question. Of course they would. Would Tsunade Bachan still accept him? She was already one of the first people to treat him like human. What about Iruka sensei? How did Mizuki sensei know anyway? Why did no one tell him if the senseis all knew? What about his classmates? Did they know? Probably not. His peers were already all horrible and they didn't even know about this. Gosh, is this why all the villagers hated him? How did they know anyway? Or maybe they don't and this would just be another reason for them to kick him out of Konoha. He doesn't even want to begin thinking about his strange relations with Sasuke. But it was finally heading in a direction he wanted, yet this secret. That hero sealed it into you. Mizuki sensei had given a nonchalant shrug as if that man hadn't been Naruto's idol, the village over the life of an unwanted, abandoned brat, right? I totally get why he had done what he did. Why did Hokage Jiji keep him alive? So his suspicions were confirmed. All of the kindness from the old man was fabricated. How the highest authority would visit him, a hated, ignored orphan, was always beyond him. Now Naruto knows that it was probably to keep an eye on the Kyuubi. A Hokage wouldn't want a demon running rampant across his village now, would he? It wasn't fair. Why would the Yondaime curse him with this hatred? That's the job of a leader, right? Mizuki sensei had turned a blank eye onto Naruto. But as if Mizuki sensei could compare to the Yondaime, who was he to talk about leaders? You want to be Hokage, am I correct, Naruto-kun? So surely, you must know that it was the best decision. It wasn't fair. 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 Why was it Naruto? Why him? Couldn't it be anyone else? Maybe his classmates were right. Maybe the bitter voice in his head was right. Traitor. Maybe his parents were horrible traitors and that's why he had to deal with this. But then that wasn't fair. He didn't even know who his parents were because that stupid Hokage old geezer wouldn't tell him anything. It wasn't fair, 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 it wasn't fair. This is why he was hated. Because of the Yondaime's stupid decision. Because of the Yondaime's decision, he had to wrestle off a drunk middle-aged man who was screaming, "Give me back my daughter." Because of the Yondaime's decision, he had to map out the areas with less people or else he'd have to suffer through so many people, accidentally, shoving or tripping him. Because of the Yondaime's decision, he had to deal with all that stupid hate. It wasn't fair, it wasn't fair, it wasn't fair, it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair, it wasn't fair, it wasn't fair, it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair, it wasn't fair, it wasn't fair, it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair, 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 it wasn't fair. All the burden, all the hatred. All of it. The stares, the whispers, the murmurs, the side glances, the clattering of the mask as the shopkeeper glared down at him. That mask was a fox mask. There was that voice again. Sorry, we're sold out. Go somewhere else. Again Ibeo. This restaurant is full. Too bad for you. This place is half empty. Who told you you were allowed to come here? Why aren't I allowed here? Get out. Why? You aren't welcome here. Why? You aren't welcome in this village. Why? Shish. You're drunk, my. Don't talk to it. Who let you out of your cage? Their eyes bored down onto him, little demon. You know, the twisted voice had a curl of permanent distaste. Those villagers should just die. If it was only someone else, if only Naruto was born earlier or later or away from Konoha. Konoha doesn't want us. Why should we want Konoha either? It wasn't fair to asn fair to asn fair to asn fair it wasn't fair to asn fair to asn fair to asn fair it wasn't fair to asn fair to asn fair to asn fair it wasn't fair to asn 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 fair it wasn't fair to asn fair to asn fair to asn fair it wasn't fair to asn fair to asn fair to asn fair it wasn't fair to asn fair to asn fair to asn fair it wasn't fair to asn fair to asn fair. Since when has things gone your way, Naruto? A dark, hateful voice rang right beside his ear and he stiffened. Why did that voice sound just like his? It's okay though, Naruto-kun. Mizuki-sensei's face instantly switched to a soft and amiable one. Even if everyone hates you, I accept you. Naruto hates how he automatically chases after those words because surely, if everyone knew about that, then they'd hate him, ignore him, talk about him. Just like the adults had and still are. I know hearing the truth is painful, but always know that I accept you and your circumstance. I know it's not your fault. Mizuki-sensei's voice was smooth and calming and so unlike those resentful words he had spat at Naruto just moments before. It's really tough having to go through this, right? Mizuki-sensei casually leaned against a tree trunk. Come here now Naruto-kun. He beckoned over to him. Even if no one is by your side, I will always welcome you. Don't listen to him. He lied. He's lying. He's a liar. His face was hospitable and kind. I understand that you're a normal, kind child. To have to deal with what you've been through, it's not fair, is it? It's not. Naruto burst out, an emotion more wrathful than mere indignation exploded within him. Why me? It was more sorrowful than the tears he had shed when the Hokage had first closed the apartment door in his face. I didn't want this. His mind didn't register the step he took towards Mizuki-sensei. I didn't kill anyone. Step. I'm not a monster. Step. Why do they think I'm that? Step. Why do they just can't they tell that I'm normal? Would, Naruto's voice suddenly twisted in a malicious way, scaring himself even more. Would they hate their own child if the Yondaime had to do that to their kid? The noise cut off as Naruto felt his face pale from his own cold, harsh words. We're just being honest. That same voice whispered and Naruto felt his heart drop. I'm the real you, Naruto. The only person you can rely on. There was a bubbling of something in his stomach and if Naruto had been level-headed, he would have realized that it was more than just anger simmering in the pits of his stomach. Snake. A gravelly voice snarled before the echoes of the growl glitched and cut off. I'm just. Naruto fisted two hands into his hair, tugging panickingly, I'm just an annoying brat, right? A figure appeared into the clearing and Naruto stumbled backward again, away from Mizuki-sensei. Her heels clicked dully against the hard dirt, green Haori billowing as she swept an arm in front of Naruto protectively. Geez, I leave you alone for a little bit and you stir up all this mess. Tsunade Haim. Mizuki-sensei started before there was a blur of action. Naruto didn't even have time to register her words before the Sannin shot forward like a missile. Crrrghh bang. Two trees beside Mizuki-sensei exploded in a shower of splintered bark. The one the Chunin had been leaning against suddenly gave way under a smooth-skinned fist. There's a delayed gush of wind as the trunk rocketed backwards, knocking away the Chunin and leveled the tree behind it, and another, and another, and another. It brought upon a haze of dirt and soil in the air, rough breezes brushing at Naruto's hair. There's a halted gathering of leaves that swayed hesitantly in the air above them. The air stopped, the sounds absent sans for the thudding and cluttering of broken branches. It was almost like the atmosphere itself was marveling the superhuman strength. The cloud of dust was forcibly swept aside as the assailant flicked her wrist. Naruto blinked. There was dust gathering on his eyelashes and he could feel a thin layer of dust particles resting on his clothes and face. A split second. It was only then when Mizuki registered the attack, giving a strangled yelp as he scrambled to his feet from where he had been knocked onto the floor. Naruto blinked. The heels clicked yet again as the Sannin landed elegantly, looking too dignified for the dirtied grounds. She crossed her arms against her chest and looked down at the Chunin, not appearing the slightest bit ruffled. Powerful energy was released in waves off of the figure. The overbearing presence sent whatever wildlife left running and birds screeching. Mizuki staggered for purchase, doubling over as he grasped his head. Another second. Naruto watched as Mizuki swayed to and fro like a drunkard, his figure appearing as a cornered rat. Weak and pitiful. And another. The Chunin then dropped to his hands and knees, retching violently, one hand bracing himself, one hand clutching onto his dirtied hair. A small pool of bile, the grotesque shade of yellowish-brown, spilt down his mouth and across his front. Mizuki's face was pallid and a tinge of unnatural green. Wh was that? The man gasped, fingers scraping on the floor and gathering soil under his nails. The Sannin looked utterly remorseless as a heeled foot slammed onto the back of Mizuki's skull, shoving his face into his own small puddle of vomit. The kunoichi's face was cold and ruthless, disgust and disdain radiated unrepentantly from her frame. That. She put more pressure onto her foot as the man scrambled blindly, sickening splashes and gurgles echoing in the silent afternoon. That. She repeated through gritted teeth. Naruto dropped to his knees, clutching onto the stolen scroll like a lifeline as he leant against the trunk of a tree. He watched Tsunade Bachan snarl with the ferocity of a protective mother. Is what happens when you mess with my student. Hashirama Forest. Tsunade. With an unconscious Mizuki on the floor, Tsunade double-checked that he was out cold before swinging to the startled Uzumaki, coddling him in a bone-crushing way. Oh my gosh, brat. She almost whisper-screamed, eyes alight with cheeky glee. I saw those Kage Bunshin you were practicing and I must tell you the raw talent. It all, I'm stealing you and that baby scroll now. Wh. What do you say, Naruto? We hightail it out of here now or no? What? Scroll. Trouble. M.I. Mizuki. Rat passed out. Trouble incoming but we'll be fine. And scroll aha. Come on. Tsunade pried the scroll out of Naruto's arms and ushered him closer. I've always wanted to see what Ji-sama and Tobi Oji were hiding. She stroked the fabric of the seal with exaggerated happiness. Their constant whining of, Suna-chan, it's too dangerous and, Suna-chan, you're too young, always pissed me off so much arg. She rolled her eyes, greedily rolling open the scroll with her tongue poking out. Her eyes flicked to the boys when he gave a little snort, and Tsunade inwardly gave a soft smile when something finally sparked back into Naruto's frenzied, clouded eyes. It wasn't much, but it was better than that horrified, shattered look that looked so out of place in his young, round and almost familiar face. Being a med nin didn't only mean patching up bodies, it also meant patching up spirits, and his status reveal would undoubtedly shadow him for quite a while. And some things like this would take a long time to fully resolve. With a traitor a few meters beside them and Anbu nearing every second, the only comfort Tsunade could currently provide him was helping Naruto find ground again. The Uzumaki boy was strong enough to hold himself up until Tsunade would be able to wholeheartedly help him through it. It took me too long to read it, Tt Ibeo. The blonde made a face as he peeked over her arm. Wish we could just make a bunchen of it, Datbeo. I don't think that even works though. All her thoughts paused as Tsunade fell silent. Impossible. Huh, Uzumaki Naruto, you are impossible. I tell you. She fully extended the scroll with a wave of her arm. The object was large and heavy, but the contents weren't as much as one would expect at such an enormous scroll. The fabric was extremely thick. It had to be so that it could withstand the poignant, cloying chakra. Brown eyes flicked across the scroll, which had now extended across the entire clearing, stretching over a dozen meters in length. The Kage Bunshin was the first shown jutsu, but it took up the least amount of space. The instructions and analysis took up half a meter, while numerous complex ninjutsus and chakra-enhancing techniques took up more than double the amount of space. Figured. While there were hundreds of jutsus known in Konoha, the most dangerous ones were locked into the scroll. Well, it was really badly locked, so there'd only be a few. Tsunade glanced up at Naruto when the boy let out a slight whoa down at a certain fuinjutsu design which stretched an entire 2 meters in length. The Hake no Fuin Shiki. What irony. Tsunade just gave the boy a slightly grim smile. You wanna learn that? You die when you use it though. She tapped a red-coated nail onto the provided diagram. I had thought about that before, dying while using an awesome jutsu, Tt Ibeo. Naruto scratched the back of his head. Reminds her of Minato, like he was making an embarrassing confession. Sacrificing my life to be a hero. A bitter thing tugged down the corner of his lips, and Tsunade had to hold herself back from doing the same. Sacrifice. Ha. What bullshit. She clenched her jaw shut so that she wouldn't voice her opinion. Naruto beat her to it anyway. Sacrifice. He scoffed. That's stupid now that I think about it. It's not like. When Naruto had decided to not finish his sentence, Tsunade finished it for him. Like the dead can do anything, right? But I'm stupid too. The boy muttered quietly, voice growing softer and softer until Tsunade couldn't catch the rest of it. 'Cause I have a feeling all. To distract both of them from the somber atmosphere, she drew their attention back to Naruto's previous statement, pulling a spare empty scroll which she always carried with her for emergencies out from her haori. A bunshin of this scroll, you say? Naruto squinted up at her, brows raised questioningly. Checking her surroundings for company, she threaded her chakra over each perfectly written kanji, copying and analyzing the contents of the scroll of seals in a single minute due to her impeccable control, then pasting chakra-embedded ink slowly slinking into existence onto her own blank scroll. There was less chakra, and it was more faint, but those dozen kinjutsus were copied nonetheless. Wait a second. Sure. Tsunade was a legendary Sannin who could do miraculous things, but she still felt an enormous sweat drop lingering about her head because it was that easy. That easy. She glanced around suspiciously. Surely it wasn't that simple. Konoha's most dangerous scroll stolen by an academy student, then duplicated in a mere minute. Just like that. Were they being serious? Sarutobi was a fool for not enhancing it with more seals. She swore that all these higher-ups had their brain muddled, that was if they even had any. Weak-ass barriers, weak-ass privacy seals. her boss Sama had taught her only the bare scrapes of Uzumaki's in-depth fuinjutsu, and even she knew that their explosive tags were drawn not as efficiently as possible. When Tsunade looked down at the scroll of Seals 2.0, she faced a befuddled Naruto with a beam. She tucked it into her haori. That was so cool, Datbeo. What the hell, Ba-chan? I know, right? I'm amazing. We are so going to piss off everyone. Tsunade gave a scarily happy grin. I can't wait to see the look on Sarutobi's face once I get you to learn all of T. Oh yeah, that's right. Tsunade recalled her previous preparations with Sarutobi and then looked down at Naruto, who was squinting back up at her. She had made up her mind. Hey, listen here. Tsunade straightened her spine, complete seriousness in her eyes as she peered down at the twin blue eyes. Naruto instantly straightened in reply, suddenly looking nervous. I am not joking, I am not lying. Her gaze seared into the others. Uzumaki Naruto, I want you to become my disciple and inherit my summoning contract. One word of consent is all you need to say for you to be rid of this place for the next 3 years. For this time I'll allow you to request. Anytime you wish and anywhere you want we'll go. We'll leave. Naruto's mouth was slightly agape, pure shock in his eyes. Her decision was rushed and messy and will totally screw everyone including herself up. Tsunade has no ounce of regret. A slanted smirk spread across the Senju's face and the solemn atmosphere was broken when she tossed a mischievous wink at him. What'd you say? Senju Tsunade is hereby offering a once-in-a-millennium chance. Why, you mean you weren't kidding? Really? You really mean it? Weary suspicion lingered in his eyes and Tsunade inwardly cursed the rat again. The first thing you'll need to learn, Naruto, the Sannin crossed her arms, is that I don't repeat myself unnecessarily. If Senju Tsunade, the legendary Sannin, did not mean it, she would not say it. She paused, waiting for his sole attention. I swear, Naruto, her brown eyes suddenly sharpened like a hawk's, I swear on my honor, my blood and my summoning contract that I am not lying. A new emotion was introduced into the turbulent blue eyes. It was a softer, sadder, a more desperate kind of emotion. The want for love. T then, determined, hardened with a fiery glint, and the grin was reciprocated brilliantly. Hell yeah, Tsunade Bachan. Let's leave on an adventure to explore the world. Let's leave. A flurry of thoughts visibly raced through Naruto's eyes before they turned resolved. Before the sun sets, Datbeo. Anbu. A scroll was thrown towards him before he could register the scenery. Tisk. You Anbu are crappy, no offense. The renowned Sannin waved a dismissive hand and Bor remained emotionless as he verified the scroll. You took so long to find an academy student. Tisk. Tsunade Haim. He then bowed alongside a dozen other Anbu. Could why? This rat here, the Sannin gestured to the Chunin who still laid unconscious. Manipulated the Uzumaki brat into stealing the scroll of seals. Yes, Tsunade Haim interrupted him before he even opened his mouth. I confirmed that he's a traitor. Go report to Sarutobi and scurry along now, tree ninjas. Owl hesitated, and Bor would usually be shocked at the fact that Owl hesitated, but he was also a little taken aback by the sudden information. It didn't help how casual the Sannin was acting. We request that you report to Sarutobi about the events. Yeah. I've been around for longer than you Anbu chibis, don't need to boss me around. Bor felt slightly embarrassed as he gingerly picked up the bile-sodden man, giving another curt nod to the Haim before shunshing to the entrance of the T&I with a few others accompanying him. Even though he had done everything like any other Anbu would, he couldn't help but feel like a clumsy child in front of the legend. It completely slipped Bor's mind that the Uzumaki child also should have been present for report. Why wasn't the vessel at the scene? What had the vessel done at the time? It completely slipped Bor's mind. How very un-Anbu-like. Unimpressed. Ibiki. Unimpressed. The man had literally touched Mizuki's nails before confession spilt out like a water spout. Tsunade Haim had strolled in 15 minutes after submitting a paper report, looking boredly at the ex-chunin who was foaming from the mouth. Wow, she drawled. How many nails was it, Ibiki? 1. He rolled his eyes before scoffing. You overestimate him. I merely touched his hand, Tsunade Haim. Damn, she replied back, voice still dull and sarcastic. You gonna kill him now? DD don't kill me. Mizuki returned to life. It's not my F. Ibiki knocked the man unconscious. That was a lot of eyes. Tsunade Haim commented. I'm unimpressed. Touché. Well, the Sanin dusted her knees. I'm going to take a last stroll around. Glad to see you still alive, Ibiki. She waved a hand as she flickered out of the building. Have a good evening, Tsunade Haim. Ibiki, distracted by her statement of his alive condition, nearly missed the first part of her sentence. He narrowed his eyes at where she used to be. What did she mean by taking a last stroll? Something was up. Or rather, something was happening. Hiruzen. He had not asked for a fricking paper report, god damn it. The information was scrawled in a careless way. By the way, I think he's Orochimaru's spy. Might wanna toughen up your defenses there. Also, he's weak as. Your standards for Chunin has plummeted. I think I've already complained, but all your Anbu are pretty awkward. Then a sentence, predicting Hiruzen's dissatisfaction, wrote, I know this report was basically useless and probably only served to irritate you, but as I said, I arrived just in time to beat the rat up. That took a total of 3 seconds and 2.5 of those seconds were spent on looking cool and intimidating. So no, I don't know shit. The end. Hell, why did he accept the hat again? Well, when he'll need to visit Naruto sooner or later to double confirm things. But Hiruzen will wait until Naruto has calmed down from the incident. He'd no doubt be in shock at the betrayal. Hiruzen could not deal with that boy right now. There would inevitably be questions, so many questions about the Kyuubi. Hiruzen didn't feel up to receiving a reminder of his past failures again. He would though. He would visit the boy tomorrow, or perhaps the day after. Resolving the conflict of a traitor or spy was more important than that boy after all. Nevertheless, Naruto was important to Hiruzen, so he will visit the boy. The Hokage felt slightly bad for the child, especially after such a brutal unveiling of his circumstance. Tsunade had assured him that it had been handled, but Hiruzen had a duty as a Grandif the Hokage Minato's predecessor, Naruto's guardian. Naruto'll be fine. For now. Naruto was a strong boy. He could always deal with these kinds of things with a happy smile on his face. That's right. Hiruzen didn't need to be concerned. Naruto was Minato's son after all. He'll just visit him. Eventually. That's right. Hiruzen will visit him sometime later. Naruto. He sat outside the academy, clasping his hands onto the rope string. There was a spot where it had been worn down from when Naruto had repeatedly clutched onto it, the sole thing that had kept him sane when the villagers had been staring at him. Some were trying to hide it, but some were unrepentant. He sat on the swing, a dull creak ringing in his eardrums. The night was so quiet that he felt like his existence was disturbing the wildlife. He leaned his head forward to press it against the string, feeling the rough braided cord dig onto his bare forehead. No hit. I ate. Failure. Dead last. Failure. Dead last. Tsunade's apprentice. But a shadow had approached the boy and Naruto had not looked up. He knew who it was because no one else would want to approach him. But why me? His voice was quiet and honestly confused. Don't question me, brat. The strange, kind and really aggressive but really honest woman, who Naruto still couldn't figure out, squinted down at him. There are many reasons why I decided to take you under my wing. He opened his mouth, a million emotions racing through his face before his jaw clicked shut, replying back with a simple nod. Their two-sentence conversation had not been brought up from then on. Not for a long while at least. Azumo, I'm here. A high-pitched giggle erupted by the front gate. Azumo squinted, nudging Kotetsu in the ribs and watching with no small amount of humor as the lazing Chunin gave a screech, stumbling onto the floor. He gestured surreptitiously to the source of the voice and Kotetsu gave a questioning look. Azumo replied with a shrug. My adorable student was almost late. Tsunade Haim jutted a hand against her, standing right next to the pair of Chunin. Azumo was not ashamed to say he screamed. My apologies, an ordinary-looking girl skipped towards the Sanin. Her mousy brown hair was in 2 braids and she wore a simple shirt with a mid-thigh skirt, mesh tights going down to her knee-length shinobi sandals. A simple weapons pouch was strapped to her left leg, a left-handed shinobi then. Upon closer look, the girl also had eyes a startling similar shade to the Yondaime's. Blue and clear. He must not have gotten enough sleep. She had the air of a well-kept, obedient daughter that was until she opened her mouth again. Ba-chan-sama, when are we going? Azumo felt his heart jump to his throat in panic. Kotetsu shared a look with him as he violently beckoned for the girl to shut up. Calling a Sanin old was suicide. He drew a line over his throat with a finger. The girl gave the two a curious look and Azumo shook his head viciously again, repeating the action but with more dramatic acting. He lolled his head to the side, sticking out his tongue for emphasis. The girl giggled. Kotetsu slapped his forehead. And oh, look at that. All of a sudden, Tsunade Haim's finger flicked to his forehead, and he fell into a fairly comfortable nap. And this is what ends up making the two to forget all about reporting to the Hokage. He'll be unimpressed. Very much so. Naruto wasn't present the day after the incident. Not in pranks, not in screams, not in anything. Usually when he got hit, Naruto would retaliate harder. Some mocked, some worried, some didn't care. Either way, no one came to check up on that boy. Nara, old man. Shikamaru dumped his small bag full of empty books onto the chair, ignoring his mother as she reprimanded him for not hanging it up properly. What? His father grumbled back, head in papers. I mean, hey, how dare you speak to your father like that? Yoshino, did I do it right? Old man, Shikamaru repeated impatiently. What? When his son didn't reply, Shikaku worriedly looked up from his paperwork. He traded a concerned look with Yoshino when the boy simply gave him a hard stare before turning around and walking towards his room. Hey, Shikamaru, drink the cup of water I poured you first. Yoshino hollered and the boy surprisingly did so without complaining. It was a tense atmosphere as Shikamaru, casually, drank his cup of water, placing down the cup a tad harder than usual and strolled towards his room again. The Nara couple was quiet when the boy's bedroom door clicked shut. Shikaku gave a groan while Yoshino brushed a piece of hair out of her face, brows furrowed. Eventually, a day turned to 3, and 3 turned to a. Yamanaka. Ino was in a bad mood again. Inoichi frowned, her rebellious stage had gone on for so long. He turned to leave before whatever rejection the last Uchiha had dished Ino would cause her to let it out on him. There was an awful lot of trouble after Mizuki was found out to be Orochimaru's spy. He really could not deal with a moody teen. Dad. A small head popped into his study and Inoichi stiffened in surprise. Ah, Ino. Look, now's really not the time but. I made you pancakes. Inoichi paused. Indeed, he did smell pancakes. Look, Dad. Ino had slid next to him, eyes darting to his work for a second before returning. I'm sorry. I'm gonna be different now, you know. By the time Inoichi registered what his daughter had said, all that was remaining of her presence was a plate of Japanese fluffy pancakes, drizzled with too much syrup for his own good. Just how he liked it. When midnight struck, he finally found the time to leave his stifling room. Scrolls littering the area, in clusters though, as if they had tried to be neat. There were charred ingredients in the trash and Inoichi groaned at how much food had been wasted. Look, Dad, I'm sorry. He really needed to buy a cookbook to show his daughter how to be more efficient next time. A fortnight had passed and some grew concerned at the boy's absence. Less than a dozen but more people than Naruto thought liked him anyway. Many were insulting Naruto, calling him pathetic for hiding after being confronted about his treason. Others decided to respect his decision and give him time to cope. Iruka. This was absurd. He had no idea why Hokage was just letting it rest. He had stopped by Naruto's apartment 3 times. And every time, he couldn't muster up the motivation to approach the door. Yumino Iruka is going to be honest. He was a shitty teacher. And yes, saying a curse word was just to highlight the significance of his grave error. A teacher must not be biased. There was a purpose for the academy and there was a purpose for senseis. And that purpose was not to take advantage of students' vulnerabilities, regardless of their personal prejudice towards them. He was at Naruto's apartment door for the 4th time and he was determined to knock on the door. Not only to check if he was okay, but also to apologize for everything and make amends. An inhale, an exhale and knock, knock. Naruto, are you in there? No reply. Iruka frowned, hesitantly touching the door knob. Did he have the right? Of course he did. Iruka was Naruto's teacher. Was that justified? Iruka's hand retreated from the door knob. Naruto. He called again louder. Iruka pressed a ear against the door, focusing deeply on his senses. There was the ticking of the clock and the telltale dripping of broken pipes. Did that boy not pay his rent or something? There was a faint scuffle between the walls and Iruka grimaced, probably a rat. He shut off those noises and stretched his senses further for a breath or a shuffle or any movement. Nothing. Silence. Feeling extremely unnerved, Iruka twisted the handle. Naruto, I'm coming in now. Oh, Iruka thought with a little dread. Oh, Iruka thought again as he scrambled towards the Hokage tower. Naruto was gone. Half an hour later. You say he's gone. Hokage-sama was eerily still. Yes, he hadn't appeared for so long. He would need access to food and water to be able to survive. However, the shopkeepers had not reported any signs of the boy approaching the market. I assumed he'd be in his apartment, but it was empty. His clothes, his weapons, his. Iruka trailed off as he realized that the boy owned basically nothing else. Figured. Senseis were usually in charge of distributing things anyway. Hokage-sama pinched the bridge of his nose. Did you check around the cage? Sighed tiredly, the Akasan. Iruka balked. The Akasan, sir. What was a child doing in a place like there? Suddenly, he recalled the foreign phrase Naruto had spoken and those outer nations looking people and everything made sense. Where else would Naruto go anyway if not there? I told him not to go there anymore, but I'm sure he still does. Naruto doesn't know that I can watch him from afar. He pointedly looked at the crystal ball. He goes around to the back and sometimes the workers feed him the leftovers. I don't really blame him if he did go there though, they're the only ones who'd accept him. And I hadn't wanted to restrict his only source of genuine kindness either. The Hokage looked worn down and absolutely done. His sentences weren't uttered with the same wise elegance, instead, they were verging on annoyed and fatigued. Iruka felt not a smidge but a river full of guilt, not only for further burdening the Hokage, but also for never taking note of Naruto's existence. There was a gentle knock on the Hokage's office door, but the chakra signature behind it was all but bleeding with impatience. Come in, Kakashi. The Hokage sighed again. Hokage-sama. The Hatake instantly slid into a one-kneed position, head bowed, an instinctive move for Anbu before the Hokage wrinkled his brows. That's when Iruka remembered that Kakashi was supposedly forcefully dismissed from Anbu. After, the ANB Jonin's voice suddenly turned strained, after I had returned from my mission, I had found out about Naruto's disappearance and found his last presence in the outskirts of the Akasan. He is not there anymore. However, I have retrieved a note from a prostitute. Give it to me. The Hokage breathed in deeply, eyes clenched shut in barely concealed irritation. Give the darned letter to me. A wad of folded paper appeared in Kakashi's hand, raising forwards to the cage like an offering. Hiruzen, Sarutobi-sensei, it started. It was written by Tsunade, he realized with mild surprise. Hiruzen could already feel the word, sensei, glaring up at him in a mocking, derisive way. He knows Tsunade hadn't called him that this entire time. Sarutobi-sensei, always making a fool out of me with your wise words. Telling me to give that orphan a chance, and not even a few hours later the boy shows off how right your words were. I'm ashamed in the way I'm leaving with him, but I'm more ashamed in the way Konoha had cast aside such a hidden gem. How much time has passed since I caught the traitor? And by that, I mean, how much time has passed since I had left with Naruto? How long did it take for you to notice his absence? How long did it take for you or anyone to go check up on him? I want to know just how badly Konoha had screwed up, so I gave myself an alibi here in Konoha for the next month or so. You received reports that I was working and studying, but if you had checked up on me, you would have noticed it was merely a clone. If you had just approached me without shame, you would have noticed. I'm writing this now with my freshly sanitized hands, the stench of rat had never befitted the slug after all. It has been a mere quarter hour since I dumped the trash into Ibiki's place, glad to know the decent shinobi was still alive, so I'd expect it had been a minimum of half a week since we had left. One day to check up on Naruto and another to find it in this area. I would go on about the absurdities of why Naruto, an 11-year-old kid, was friends with half the prostitutes and underground yakuza, but for your sake, I won't. If you find this letter and more than a fortnight has passed, don't how can you bot don't you dare both come after Chase A. I'll say one thing and one thing only. It's something that I realized I've been repeating a lot since the first letter you sent me. Disappointing. You care for the boy, don't you, Sarutobi-sensei? Either sides of your answer to that question would lead to just one thing: leave us alone. If you care for him, let him go where he wants for once. He won't be in danger if he's with Shizune and I. If you don't care for him, then why even bother reading this far? From what I could deduce, you were one of the few who showed Naruto care. If even that was fake, let him be. There were things you have taught me, and now, I will apply your wise teachings. The council had requested and I had agreed. Then, just moments ago, I had requested and you had agreed. Don't. The letter hissed up at Sarutobi, be a hypocrite. Sincerely. The letter ended the same way Sarutobi's had. Legendary Sannin, Senju Tsunade, Uruka. The Hitaki Jonin then promptly gave a stiff bow, flickering out of the area. The cage threw the letter onto his table, and Uruka's eyes latched onto the scrawl, immediately jumping to. If you find this letter and more than a fortnight has passed. They both cast a glance at the calendar. Uruka's heart dropped, in guilt. It had been exactly 31 days since Mizuki had been imprisoned. It had been exactly 31 days since Naruto had left. Disappointing. They could both hear Senju Tsunade's voice ring.